Beyond the material universe lies a realm that defies conventional understanding, where the laws of physics bend and break under the weight of pure emotion and psychic energy. The Immaterium, known to imperial scholars as the Warp and to ancient texts as the Sea of Souls, exists as a parallel dimension that has shadowed real space since the first sentient thoughts flickered into existence across the galaxy. This roiling ocean of psychic force represents both humanity's greatest tool for interstellar travel and communication, and its most terrible curse. The fundamental nature of the Immaterium stems from its composition of raw psychic energy, generated by the emotions, thoughts, and dreams of every sentient being throughout the galaxy. Unlike the ordered matter and energy that comprise real space, the Warp consists entirely of these psychic emanations, creating a dimension where consciousness itself becomes the primary building material. Every fear, every hope, every moment of rage or despair contributes to the ever-changing tapestry of this otherworldly realm. The stronger the emotion, the more profound its impact upon the Warp's turbulent currents. This psychic dimension operates according to principles that bear no resemblance to the natural laws governing physical reality. Time flows in impossible directions, space folds upon itself in recursive loops, and causality becomes a malleable concept subject to the whims of collective belief and emotional resonance. What appears as a vast ocean to one observer might manifest as a crystalline labyrinth to another, while a third might perceive it as an endless battlefield where the screams of the dying echo across eternity. The Warp's appearance depends entirely upon the psychic imprint of those who observe it, making objective study nearly impossible. The relationship between sentient consciousness and the Immaterium operates as a feedback loop of staggering complexity. Every living being with even rudimentary self-awareness contributes to the Warp's composition through their psychic presence, yet the Warp simultaneously influences these same beings through its chaotic emanations. This symbiotic relationship has shaped both dimensions since the earliest epochs of galactic history, when primitive life forms first developed the capacity for abstract thought and emotional response. Warp currents form through the aggregation of similar psychic energies, creating streams of concentrated emotion that flow through the Immaterium like rivers of liquid thought. These currents can span light years in real space terms, carrying the accumulated fears of entire civilizations or the collective rage of species-wide conflicts. Where multiple currents intersect, they create eddies and whirlpools of psychic force that can persist for millennia, becoming semi-permanent features in an otherwise fluid landscape. Some of these formations grow so stable and powerful that they develop their own gravitational pull within the Warp, drawing in additional psychic energy and growing ever stronger. The most significant of these formations eventually coalesce into entities of pure psychic force, beings that exist as living embodiments of specific emotions or concepts. These Warp entities range from minor demons that flicker in and out of existence like psychic sparks, to the great powers that have achieved something approaching godhood through the worship and fear of countless mortals. The four greatest of these entities have become known to imperial scholars as the Ruinous Powers, each representing a fundamental aspect of sentient experience taken to its most extreme and corrupted form. The ever-shifting landscape of the Sea of Souls reflects the changing emotional states of the galaxy's inhabitants. During periods of galactic peace, the Warp might achieve relative calm, its currents flowing in predictable patterns that allow for safer navigation and clearer psychic communication. However, such periods prove exceedingly rare in the grim darkness of the far future. More commonly, the Immaterium churns with the accumulated trauma of endless warfare, the desperation of dying civilizations, and the corrupting influence of those who have succumbed to its dark promises. Major galactic events leave permanent scars upon the Warp's fabric. The fall of the Eldar civilization and the birth of Slaanesh created a massive psychic wound known as the Eye of Terror, where the barrier between dimensions has been permanently weakened. Similarly, the opening of the Great Rift during the 13th Black Crusade split the galaxy in two, creating a massive warp storm that continues to rage across half the Imperium. These catastrophic events demonstrate how the material and immaterial realms remain inextricably linked, each capable of inflicting terrible damage upon the other. The dichotomy between the warp's potential benefits and its inherent dangers creates one of the fundamental tensions that define existence in the 41st millennium. On one hand, the Immaterium provides humanity with its only practical means of faster than light travel and communication across the vast distances of the galaxy. Without warp travel, the Imperium would fragment into isolated systems, unable to maintain the unity necessary for survival against the countless threats that beset humanity. The Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon powered by the Emperor's will and the sacrifice of thousands of psychers, allows Imperial vessels to navigate the warp's treacherous currents and maintain some semblance of interstellar civilization. Psychic powers themselves represent another aspect of the warp's potential benefits. Those blessed or cursed with psychic abilities can tap into the Immaterium's vast energies to perform feats impossible through purely physical means. Imperial sanctioned psychers serve crucial roles throughout the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, providing communication across interstellar distances, detecting hidden threats, and wielding devastating powers in battle. The Space Marine librarians combine psychic might with superhuman physical prowess, while the Grey Knights represent the pinnacle of anti-demon warfare through their mastery of both psychic powers and incorruptible faith. Yet for every benefit the warp provides, it extracts a terrible price. The same psychic energies that power Imperial civilization also serve as gateways for demonic incursion. Every use of psychic power creates ripples in the Immaterium that can attract the attention of malevolent entities seeking entry into real space. The stronger the psychic manifestation, the greater the risk of catastrophic breach. Entire worlds have been lost when a single psyker's control faltered at a crucial moment, allowing demons to pour through the resulting tear in reality's fabric. The corruption inherent in warp exposure affects not just psychers, but anyone who spends significant time in the Immaterium's vicinity. Voidship crews who make frequent warp transits often develop mutations, madness, or worse. Some become conduits for demonic possession, while others gradually lose their humanity as the warp's chaotic energies rewrite their very essence. The Imperium's strict regulations regarding warp travel, including mandatory Geller field activation and limited transit times, represent desperate attempts to minimize these risks while maintaining interstellar commerce and communication. The Adeptus Mechanicus approaches the Immaterium from a distinctly technological perspective, viewing it as another form of energy to be harnessed and controlled through proper application of sacred knowledge. Their tech adepts study warp phenomena with the same methodical precision they apply to plasma reactors or cogitator arrays, seeking to quantify and categorize its properties through empirical observation. Machine spirits, they theorize, represent a form of artificial consciousness that interacts with the warp in ways similar to organic psychic activity, though they remain divided on whether this represents a blessing or a potential corruption of the Omnissiah's sacred designs. Mechanicus research into warp technology has produced remarkable innovations, including improved Geller field generators, more efficient warp drives, and sophisticated detection equipment capable of monitoring psychic phenomena. Their forge worlds maintain extensive databases of warp current patterns, stellar cartography that includes Immaterium navigation hazards, and detailed analyses of how different materials and technologies interact with psychic energies. This scientific approach allows them to create more reliable warp-capable vessels and better protective equipment for those who must work in psychically active environments. However, the Mechanicus's technological focus sometimes blinds them to the warp's more subtle dangers. Their belief that sufficient knowledge and proper procedures can master any phenomenon has led to several catastrophic incidents where demon incursions overwhelmed even the most sophisticated containment systems. The loss of several forge worlds to warp storms and demonic invasion serves as a reminder that the Immaterium cannot be fully tamed through technology alone. Imperial scholars outside the Mechanicus tend toward more theological interpretations of the warp's nature. Many view the Immaterium as a realm of testing, where the Emperor's light must constantly battle against the darkness of chaos. This perspective frames psychic powers as divine gifts that carry corresponding responsibilities, and warp travel as a necessary pilgrimage through a realm of spiritual trial. The ecclesiarchy's teachings emphasize faith as the ultimate protection against warp corruption, promoting rituals and prayers designed to strengthen the soul against demonic influence. Academic institutions throughout the Imperium maintain departments dedicated to studying warp phenomena, though their research operates under strict theological oversight. These scholars focus primarily on historical analysis of warp storms, statistical studies of psychic manifestation rates, and theoretical models of how the Immaterium might be better navigated or defended against. Their work contributes to improved training programs for Imperial psychers, better early warning systems for warp storm formation, and more effective anti-demon tactics for Imperial military forces. The various Xenos races throughout the galaxy have developed their own unique perspectives on the Immaterium, shaped by their distinct psychic signatures and cultural evolution. The Eldar, as the most psychically gifted of the major species, possess an understanding of the warp that far exceeds human knowledge. Their craft worlds navigate the Immaterium using spirit stones and wraithbone, constructs that interact with psychic energies in ways Imperial technology cannot replicate. Eldar seers can perceive potential futures by reading the warp's currents, though the traumatic birth of Slaanesh has made such divination increasingly dangerous for their species. Eldar mythology describes the warp as the realm where their gods once dwelled, before the catastrophic psychic event known as the Fall destroyed most of their pantheon and gave birth to their greatest enemy. This theological framework shapes their approach to psychic powers, which they view as a sacred inheritance that must be carefully controlled to avoid attracting Slaanesh's attention. Their infinity circuits represent sophisticated attempts to shield Eldar souls from the warp's corruption after death, creating artificial afterlives that exist partially within the Immaterium while remaining protected from its worst influences. The Orc species demonstrates a fundamentally different relationship with the warp, one based on collective belief rather than individual psychic development. Orc weirdboys channel the psychic energy generated by large gatherings of their kind, creating reality-altering effects that depend more on the surrounding orcs' expectations than on any formal understanding of psychic principles. This Gestalt psychic field allows orcs to achieve impossible feats through sheer collective conviction, making their ramshackle technology function despite violating numerous physical laws. Orc understanding of the warp remains largely instinctual and practical rather than theoretical. They perceive it as another battlefield where the strongest and most cunning can claim victory, and their demon-fighting specialists known as Painboys approach warp entities with the same brutal directness they apply to any other enemy. This crude but effective methodology has allowed orc civilizations to survive warp storms and demon incursions that would devastate more sophisticated species. The Tau Empire's relatively recent emergence onto the galactic stage means their understanding of the warp remains limited compared to older civilizations. Their weak psychic presence initially protected them from the worst aspects of Immaterium exposure, allowing their early expansion to proceed without significant demon incursions or warp storm interference. However, as their empire grows and they encounter more psychically active species, the Tau have begun developing their own theories about the Immaterium's nature and dangers. Tau's scientific philosophy approaches the warp as another natural phenomenon to be studied and eventually mastered through technological advancement and rational analysis. Their Earth-cast engineers work to develop warp-capable vessels and psychic detection equipment, while their Fire-cast warriors train to combat demon incursions with the same tactical precision they apply to conventional warfare. This methodical approach has yielded some successes, but the Tau's limited psychic development means they often underestimate the warp's more subtle threats. The Necrons represent perhaps the most unique perspective on the Immaterium, as their transformation into mechanical beings largely severed their connection to the warp. This isolation from psychic phenomena grants them certain advantages, including immunity to most forms of demon possession and warp corruption. However, it also limits their ability to perceive or interact with psychic threats, creating blind spots in their otherwise formidable strategic capabilities. Necron technology includes devices specifically designed to disrupt warp phenomena, creating null zones where psychic powers fail and demon manifestation becomes impossible. These anti-psychic fields represent a completely different approach to warp defense, one based on negation rather than resistance or control. Some Necron dynasties have weaponized this technology, creating devastating anti-psyker weapons and reality-stabilizing devices that can seal warp rifts through purely technological means. The transformation of the Immaterium from a relatively benign realm of psychic energy into the nightmare dimension that plagues the 41st millennium began during the most catastrophic conflict in galactic history. 65 million years ago, when humanity's ancestors were still primitive mammals scurrying beneath the feet of dinosaurs, two ancient civilizations engaged in a war so devastating that its psychic echoes continue to poison the warp to this day. The war in heaven between the Old Ones and the Necron tier, later transformed into the soulless Necrons, marked the first time that organized warfare on a galactic scale flooded the Immaterium with concentrated hatred, violence, and despair. Before this ancient conflict, the warp existed in a state that Imperial scholars can barely comprehend. Psychic currents flowed in gentle patterns, reflecting the simple emotions and basic survival instincts of primitive life forms scattered across the galaxy. The few sentient species that had evolved possessed limited psychic presence, their thoughts and feelings creating minor ripples in the sea of souls rather than the torrential storms that would come later. This primordial Immaterium lacked the malevolent entities that now prowl its depths, existing instead as a realm of potential energy waiting to be shaped by the collective consciousness of more advanced civilizations. The Old Ones, among the first species to achieve true mastery over both the material universe and the Immaterium, understood the warp's malleable nature better than any civilization that followed. These ancient beings possessed psychic abilities that dwarfed even the most powerful Eldar Farseers, capable of manipulating reality itself through focused will and deep understanding of the universe's fundamental forces. They used the warp not merely for travel or communication, but as a tool for creation itself, seeding worlds with life and guiding evolution along paths that would produce the psychically gifted species they desired. The Necron tier civilization that arose to challenge the Old Ones represented their philosophical opposite in almost every conceivable way. Where the Old Ones celebrated life and psychic potential, the Necron tier suffered under the curse of their dying homeworld's radiation, living brief, pain-filled lives while watching their ancient enemies enjoy apparent immortality. This fundamental inequality bred a resentment that festered across millennia, eventually exploding into open warfare when diplomatic solutions proved impossible. The Necron tier's alliance with the Khatan, star gods of immense power and malevolent intelligence, transformed this conflict from a conventional war between civilizations into an existential struggle between life and death itself. The psychic warfare that erupted during the war in heaven introduced concepts of organized violence and systematic hatred into the Immaterium on a scale never before experienced. Entire star systems became battlegrounds where psychic energies unleashed by both sides created permanent scars in the warp's fabric. The Old Ones' mastery of psychic powers allowed them to weaponize the Immaterium itself, turning warp storms into siege engines and summoning energies that could sterilize planets from across the galaxy. Each psychic attack sent waves of destructive emotion cascading through the Sea of Souls, gradually building up reservoirs of malevolent energy that would later coalesce into the first proto-demonic entities. The Necrons, despite their eventual transformation into soulless mechanical beings, contributed their own form of corruption to the warp through the sheer intensity of their hatred and the Khatan's influence. Before their biotransference into living metal bodies, the Necron tier's collective rage and despair at their cursed existence created dark currents in the Immaterium that resonated with themes of entropy, decay, and the desire for oblivion. The Khatan themselves, beings of pure energy that fed on stellar matter and life force, represented a form of anti-life that poisoned the warp through their very presence, introducing concepts of absolute negation and the hunger to consume all existence. Recognizing that they faced extinction against the technologically superior Necron legions and their Khatan masters, the Old Ones embarked upon their most ambitious and ultimately catastrophic project: the creation of psychically gifted warrior races designed to tip the balance of the galactic war. This desperate measure would prove to be one of the most significant factors in the warp's eventual corruption, as it flooded the galaxy with psychic energy on an unprecedented scale, while simultaneously introducing new forms of emotional resonance that the Immaterium had never before experienced. The Eldar emerged as perhaps the most successful of these created races, their psychic potential exceeding even their creators' expectations. Every Eldar possessed an inherent connection to the warp that allowed them to perceive its currents and manipulate its energies with remarkable precision. However, this gift came with a terrible price. Their intense emotional nature and psychic sensitivity meant that every feeling, every thought, every experience was amplified and transmitted into the Immaterium with extraordinary intensity. The Eldar's capacity for both ecstasy and suffering would eventually contribute to the birth of Slaanesh, but during the War in Heaven, their collective psychic presence began introducing themes of perfectionism, artistic obsession, and emotional extremism into the warp's composition. The Krork, massive green-skinned warriors that would eventually devolve into the modern orc species, represented the Old Ones' attempt to create the perfect soldiers for their war against the Necrons. These beings possessed a Gestalt psychic field that grew stronger as their numbers increased, allowing them to achieve impossible feats through collective belief and shared aggression. The Krork's psychic signature introduced concepts of endless warfare, brutal competition, and the joy of combat into the Immaterium, creating currents of violence that would persist long after their creator's civilization had fallen. Their simple but powerful emotions added layers of crude but potent psychic energy to the warp, contributing to the formation of what would eventually become the domain of Khorne. Other races created during this period included various reptilian and amphibian species, each designed with specific psychic signatures intended to serve particular roles in the war effort. Some possessed abilities focused on healing and regeneration, their psychic emanations introducing themes of renewal and biological adaptation into the warp. Others were crafted as living weapons, their minds attuned to destruction and tactical thinking, adding strategic cunning and calculated violence to the Immaterium's growing arsenal of malevolent concepts. The diversity of these created species meant that nearly every aspect of sentient experience was being amplified and broadcast into the warp simultaneously, creating a chaotic mixture of psychic energies that began to interact in unpredictable ways. The unintended consequences of this massive psychic awakening became apparent as the war progressed. The warp, previously a realm of gentle currents and minor fluctuations, began experiencing violent storms as conflicting psychic energies collided and merged. Areas of the Immaterium that had remained stable for millions of years suddenly erupted into chaos as the accumulated emotions of galactic warfare reached critical mass. The first proto-demonic entities began to manifest during this period, simple creatures of pure emotion that existed as living embodiments of the violence, hatred, and desperation that had come to dominate the Sea of Souls. These early demon analogs lacked the sophistication and power of the entities that would later serve the ruinous powers, but they represented a fundamental shift in the warp's nature. For the first time, the Immaterium contained beings that existed purely to spread the emotions that had created them, establishing the feedback loops of corruption that would eventually transform the realm into the hellish dimension known to Imperial scholars. The Old Ones, despite their mastery of psychic phenomena, failed to recognize the long-term implications of what they had unleashed, focusing instead on the immediate tactical advantages their created races provided in the war against the Necrons. The conflict's escalation introduced increasingly sophisticated forms of psychic warfare as both sides sought decisive advantages. The Old Ones developed weapons that could manipulate time itself, creating temporal anomalies that allowed them to attack their enemies before battles had even begun. These chronological distortions sent ripples through the warp that confused cause and effect, introducing paradoxes and impossibilities that further destabilized the Immaterium structure. Necron retaliation often involved reality-altering technologies that could unmake entire star systems, their Catan masters wielding powers that violated the fundamental laws of physics and sent shockwaves of existential terror through the psychic realm. The gradual transformation of the Necron tier into the soulless Necrons represented another crucial factor in the warp's corruption. The biotransference process, orchestrated by the Catan as part of their manipulation of the Necron tier race, severed millions of souls from their physical forms and cast them into the Immaterium as raw psychic energy. This massive influx of disembodied consciousness, filled with the rage and betrayal the Necron tier felt upon realizing they had been deceived by their supposed saviors, created permanent whirlpools of negative emotion within the warp. These areas became breeding grounds for malevolent entities, providing the psychic raw material that would eventually coalesce into the first true demons. The Catan's role in the warp's corruption extended beyond their manipulation of the Necron tier race. These star gods possessed an inherent hatred of psychic phenomena and the living beings that generated such energies, viewing them as aberrations that disrupted the ordered cosmos they sought to create. Their presence in real space created null zones where psychic powers failed and the warp's influence diminished, but the boundaries of these areas became sites of intense psychic turbulence as the Immaterium's energies pressed against the barriers the Catan created. This constant pressure and the violent reactions it generated added another layer of instability to the already chaotic warp currents. The Catan's feeding habits contributed additional corruption to the Immaterium through their consumption of life force itself. Each world they devoured, each species they exterminated, sent waves of terror and despair cascading through the warp as billions of sentient beings faced annihilation. The psychic screams of dying civilizations created permanent scars in the Sea of Souls, dark regions where the accumulated trauma of extinction events continued to echo across the millennia. These areas became focal points for the formation of entities dedicated to death, decay, and the inevitable entropy that the Catan represented. As the war in heaven reached its climax, the cumulative effect of millions of years of psychic warfare had fundamentally altered the Immaterium's character. What had once been a calm sea of potential energy had become a roiling maelstrom of conflicting emotions and malevolent entities. The various currents of violence, hatred, despair, and corruption that the war had introduced began to coalesce around specific themes, forming the proto-domains that would eventually become the realms of the four ruinous powers. Though Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh would not achieve full consciousness for millions of years, the psychic foundations for their eventual emergence were laid during this ancient conflict. The war's conclusion came not through victory by either side, but through mutual exhaustion and the intervention of forces neither the Old Ones nor the Necrons had anticipated. The psychic races created by the Old Ones had grown beyond their creators' control, developing their own agendas and conflicts that further complicated the galactic situation. Plagues of unknown origin, possibly the first manifestations of what would later be recognized as Nurgle's influence, swept through both Old One territories and their created species, weakening their war effort at crucial moments. The Necrons' victory proved Pyrrhic, as their transformation into soulless machines had cost them the very essence that made conquest meaningful. The Catan, having achieved their goal of galactic dominance, turned on each other in conflicts that shattered several of them into fragments and weakened the rest. Faced with internal rebellion from their Necron servants and the realization that their empire of death held no satisfaction, the surviving Catan agreed to the Great Sleep, entering stasis tombs scattered across the galaxy to await a future time when conditions might prove more favorable for their reign. The Great Sleep that followed the war in Heaven's End provided no respite for the corrupted Immaterium. The psychic energies unleashed during the conflict continued to churn through the warp, creating new combinations of malevolent force and spawning increasingly sophisticated demon entities. The absence of the war's protagonists meant that no force existed capable of imposing order on the chaos they had created, allowing the corruption to spread and intensify without opposition. The warp storms that had been localized phenomena during the active conflict began to merge and expand, creating vast regions of psychic turbulence that would persist for millions of years. The sleeping Necrons contributed to the warp's ongoing corruption through their very existence as an affront to the natural order. Their tomb worlds, scattered across the galaxy like malignant tumors, created permanent weak points where the boundary between life and death had been compromised. The psychic resonance of their undying hatred continued to seep into the Immaterium even during their dormancy, ensuring that the themes of entropy, mechanical perfection, and the rejection of organic life remained active currents within the Sea of Souls. The corrupted psychic energies that had accumulated in the Immaterium during the war in heaven did not remain as chaotic, undirected force. Over the course of millions of years following that ancient conflict, these malevolent currents began to coalesce around specific emotional and conceptual themes, gradually forming distinct regions within the Sea of Souls, where particular aspects of sentient experience became concentrated and amplified. The process resembled the formation of stellar bodies from cosmic dust clouds, but instead of gravity drawing together matter and energy, it was the natural resonance between similar psychic emanations that created these growing centers of power within the warp. The emergence of what would become known as the four ruinous powers occurred not through sudden manifestation, but through an agonizingly slow accumulation of psychic mass that spanned geological ages. Each proto-deity began as little more than a persistent eddy in the warp's currents, a region where specific emotions and concepts gathered with slightly greater density than the surrounding psychic medium. As civilizations rose and fell across the galaxy, their collective experiences fed these growing concentrations of power, adding layer upon layer of emotional resonance until they achieved a critical mass that allowed for the first stirrings of consciousness. The exact chronology of their births remains impossible to determine with precision, as the warp's non-linear relationship with time means that cause and effect operate according to principles that defy conventional understanding. What Imperial scholars can determine is that each of the four powers emerged from fundamentally different aspects of the galactic community's psychic emanations, their distinct natures reflecting the diverse ways in which sentient beings experience existence, suffering, and desire. Khorne, the blood god, drew his essence from the endless cycles of violence that had defined galactic civilization since the war in Heaven's conclusion. Every act of warfare, from the desperate struggles of primitive tribes fighting for survival to the grand campaigns of star-spanning empires, contributed to the growing reservoir of rage and bloodlust that would eventually achieve divine consciousness. The Krork's legacy of perpetual conflict provided a substantial foundation for this accumulation, their species' instinctive love of battle creating persistent currents of martial fury that flowed through the Immaterium like rivers of liquid aggression. The Blood God's domain within the warp manifested as an endless battlefield where the concepts of honor, courage, and martial prowess became twisted into their most extreme and destructive forms. Here, the noble desire to protect one's people transformed into an insatiable hunger for slaughter, while the warrior's dedication to skill and strength became an obsession with violence for its own sake. Khorne's realm reflected not just the brutality of war, but also its more complex emotional components, the brotherhood forged in battle, the exhilaration of victory, and the bitter satisfaction of revenge finally achieved. The skull throne that serves as Khorne's seat of power represents the ultimate expression of his domain's nature, constructed from the remains of every warrior who has ever fallen in battle throughout galactic history. Each skull tells a story of conflict, from the primitive bone clubs of prehistoric hunters to the sophisticated weapons of advanced civilizations, all united in their final contribution to the god's growing power. The brass foundations of his fortress echo with the clash of weapons and the roar of armies, creating a perpetual symphony of warfare that resonates through every corner of his domain. Khorne's followers, both mortal and demonic, embody different aspects of his violent nature. The bloodletters that serve as his primary demon servants possess a purity of purpose that focuses entirely on the act of killing, their hellblades capable of cutting through reality itself to reach their targets. These creatures lack the capacity for complex thought or emotion beyond their desire to spill blood, making them perfect instruments of their master's will. In contrast, the mortal champions who serve Khorne often retain enough of their original personalities to appreciate the finer aspects of warfare, becoming tactical geniuses whose strategic brilliance serves only to create more efficient methods of slaughter. The Blood God's influence extends beyond simple violence to encompass all forms of conflict and competition. Political struggles, economic warfare, and even philosophical debates can feed his power when they reach sufficient intensity, as the underlying aggression and desire to dominate one's opponents creates psychic emanations that resonate with his domain. This broader interpretation of conflict allows Khorne to draw strength from civilizations that might consider themselves peaceful, as even the most advanced societies contain elements of competition and struggle that contribute to his growing power. Tzeentch emerged from an entirely different set of psychic emanations, his consciousness coalescing around the hopes, ambitions, and schemes that drive sentient beings to seek change and improvement in their circumstances. Where Khorne drew power from the immediate and visceral experience of violence, the architect of fate fed on the more subtle but equally powerful emotions associated with planning, dreaming, and the pursuit of knowledge. Every scholar seeking to unlock the universe's secrets, every politician maneuvering for advantage, every individual dreaming of a better future contributed threads to the vast web of ambition and desire that would eventually achieve divine consciousness as Tzeentch. The Changer of Ways represents the fundamental drive toward transformation that exists within all sentient life. His domain encompasses not just magical power and forbidden knowledge, but also the basic desire for progress and improvement that motivates technological advancement, social reform, and personal growth. This makes Tzeentch perhaps the most insidious of the Chaos Gods, as his influence can corrupt even the most noble intentions by gradually twisting the pursuit of positive change into an obsession with power and control. The crystal labyrinth that serves as Tzeentch's realm within the warp reflects his nature as a being of infinite complexity and contradiction. The constantly shifting maze of crystalline corridors represents the endless possibilities and potential futures that exist within the Immaterium, each pathway leading to different outcomes and alternate realities. Navigating this labyrinth requires not just physical movement, but also the ability to understand the complex relationships between cause and effect that govern the flow of fate itself. Within the depths of his domain, Tzeentch maintains the Hidden Library, a vast repository of knowledge that contains every secret that has ever been discovered or will be discovered throughout the galaxy's history. The library's shelves stretch infinitely in all directions, containing not just books and scrolls, but also crystallized thoughts, bottled dreams, and fragments of pure understanding that exist as physical objects within the warp's malleable reality. Access to this knowledge comes at a terrible price, as each revelation carries with it the seeds of corruption that gradually transform the seeker into an agent of the architect of fate. Tzeentch's servants reflect his multifaceted nature through their incredible diversity and complexity. The Lords of Change, his greater demon servants, possess intellects that can comprehend multiple timelines simultaneously, allowing them to manipulate events across vast spans of time and space. These creatures serve as Tzeentch's primary agents in the material universe, orchestrating elaborate schemes that may take millennia to reach fruition. Their ability to see potential futures makes them formidable opponents, as they can anticipate and counter their enemies' strategies before those plans have even been fully formed. The horrors that make up much of Tzeentch's demonic host embody his nature as a god of change and transformation. Pink horrors cackle with maniacal glee as they hurl bolts of warp fire at their enemies, their unstable forms constantly shifting between different configurations. When destroyed, they split into blue horrors, smaller but more vicious creatures that burn with cold flame and bitter resentment. This cycle of transformation continues even in death, as blue horrors can further divide into brimstone horrors, tiny sprites of pure malice that exist solely to spread the fires of change wherever they go. the architect of fate's influence on mortal followers, creates some of the most complex and dangerous servants of chaos. Tzeentch's champions often begin as scholars, politicians, or other individuals whose pursuit of knowledge or power makes them susceptible to his whispered promises. Unlike the straightforward corruption offered by other chaos gods, Tzeentch's gifts come wrapped in layers of meaning and hidden consequences that may not become apparent for years or decades. A scholar granted the ability to understand alien languages might find that this knowledge comes with an irresistible compulsion to seek out forbidden texts, while a politician given the power to read minds discovers that this ability gradually isolates them from genuine human connection. Nurgle's emergence represented a fundamentally different response to the harsh realities of existence in a galaxy filled with suffering and death. While Khorne embodied the violent struggle against adversity, and Tzeentch represented the hope for transformation and improvement, the Lord of Decay arose from the acceptance of entropy and the embrace of life's inevitable decline. His consciousness coalesced around the psychic emanations of those who had given up the fight against disease, aging, and death, finding a strange comfort in the certainty of decay and the democratic nature of mortality that affects all living beings equally. The Plague God's domain reflects this philosophy through its paradoxical combination of death and abundance. Nurgle's garden within the warp teems with life, but it is life that has been transformed and corrupted into forms that celebrate decay rather than growth. Massive trees bear fruit that rots as it ripens, their branches heavy with blossoms that release clouds of toxic spores. Rivers of pus and bile flow through landscapes carpeted with fungi that feed on decomposing matter, creating an ecosystem where death and rebirth exist in perfect, if nauseating, harmony. The Lord of Decay's mansion stands at the center of this garden, a structure that appears to be simultaneously collapsing and rebuilding itself in an endless cycle of destruction and renewal. The building's walls weep with moisture that nourishes the various molds and bacteria that have made their home in every crack and crevice, while the rooms within contain laboratories where Nurgle experiments with new forms of disease and decay. The Plague God takes genuine pleasure in his work, approaching the creation of new plagues with the enthusiasm of an artist exploring different techniques and styles. Nurgle's relationship with his followers differs markedly from that of the other chaos gods. Where Khorne demands constant violence and Tzeentch weaves complex webs of manipulation, the Lord of Decay offers a form of acceptance and belonging that can be genuinely comforting to those who have suffered greatly. His gifts of disease and mutation are presented not as punishments, but as marks of favor, signs that the recipient has been chosen to participate in the great cycle of decay and renewal that governs all existence. The great unclean ones that serve as Nurgle's greater demon servants embody this philosophy through their grotesque but strangely jovial nature. These massive creatures possess bodies that are simultaneously repulsive and fascinating, their rotting flesh alive with countless forms of bacterial and viral life. Despite their horrifying appearance, great unclean ones maintain an almost grandfatherly demeanor, speaking in gentle tones about the beauty of decay and the comfort that can be found in accepting one's inevitable fate. Their presence on the battlefield spreads clouds of toxic gas and swarms of disease-carrying insects, but they conduct their warfare with an air of sad necessity rather than malicious glee. The plague-bearers that make up the bulk of Nurgle's demonic legions reflect his more methodical aspects, serving as the accountants and record-keepers of decay. These creatures maintain detailed tallies of every disease, every death, and every act of corruption that occurs throughout the galaxy, their ledgers serving as a comprehensive catalog of entropy's progress. Despite their single-minded focus on documentation, plague-bearers possess a strange form of contentment that comes from their absolute certainty about their purpose and place in the cosmic order. Nurgle's mortal followers often begin their journey toward corruption through desperation rather than ambition. Plague victims who pray for relief from suffering, soldiers facing certain death from infected wounds, or populations devastated by famine may find their prayers answered by the Lord of Decay's gifts. These blessings typically take the form of immunity to the very diseases that were causing suffering, but this immunity comes at the cost of becoming a carrier who spreads infection to others. The psychological transformation that accompanies this physical change gradually erodes the victim's horror at their condition, replacing it with a sense of purpose and belonging within Nurgle's great family. Slaanesh's birth differed from the other chaos gods in both its violence and its specificity. While Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle emerged gradually from the accumulated psychic emanations of countless civilizations over millions of years, the Prince of Pleasure exploded into consciousness during a single catastrophic event that nearly tore the galaxy apart. The fall of the Eldar, occurring roughly 10,000 years before the current era, created a psychic shockwave of such magnitude that it birthed a new chaos god in an instant while simultaneously creating the massive warp storm known as the Eye of Terror. The Eldar civilization that existed before the fall represented the pinnacle of psychic and technological achievement, surpassing even the Old Ones in their mastery of both the material universe and the Immaterium. Their empire spanned millions of worlds, connected by a network of webway tunnels that allowed instantaneous travel without the risks associated with conventional warp navigation. Eldar technology had advanced to the point where scarcity became meaningless, with matter converters and psychic manipulation allowing them to create anything they desired with minimal effort. This technological paradise, however, contained the seeds of its own destruction. With all material needs satisfied and no external threats capable of challenging their supremacy, Eldar society gradually turned inward, focusing on increasingly elaborate forms of entertainment and artistic expression. What began as sophisticated cultural pursuits slowly transformed into an obsession with sensation and experience that grew more extreme with each passing generation. The Eldar's naturally intense emotional nature, combined with their powerful psychic abilities, meant that every feeling was amplified and broadcast into the warp with extraordinary intensity. The pursuit of perfection that had always characterized Eldar culture became twisted into a quest for ever more intense experiences. Artists sought to create works that would provoke stronger emotional responses, pushing the boundaries of what their audiences could endure. Warriors developed fighting techniques that prioritized elegance and beauty over practical effectiveness, turning combat into a form of deadly performance art. Even the most mundane activities were elevated to ritualistic levels of complexity, as the Eldar sought to extract maximum sensation from every moment of their extended lives. This cultural transformation occurred gradually over thousands of years, with each generation pushing slightly further than the last in their pursuit of ultimate experience. The psychic emanations generated by this society-wide obsession with sensation and perfection began to accumulate within the warp, creating currents of desire and aesthetic appreciation that had never before existed in such concentrated form. The Eldar's collective unconscious, expressed through their powerful psychic abilities, began to give shape to something that would eventually become far more than the sum of its parts. The final stages of the fall saw Eldar society fragment into countless cults and factions, each dedicated to exploring different aspects of sensation and experience. Some focused on physical pleasure, developing techniques and technologies that could stimulate the nervous system in ways that transcended normal biological limitations. Others pursued emotional extremes, creating art forms designed to provoke feelings of such intensity that they bordered on psychic assault. Still others explored the boundaries between pleasure and pain, discovering that the two sensations could be combined in ways that created entirely new forms of experience. The most extreme cults abandoned all pretense of civilization, transforming their worlds into playgrounds of excess where every conceivable desire could be fulfilled without consequence or restraint. These societies became laboratories of sensation, where the boundaries between individual identity began to blur as participants lost themselves in collective experiences of unprecedented intensity. The psychic resonance generated by these activities created feedback loops that amplified the participants' desires while simultaneously broadcasting their experiences into the warp with ever-increasing power. The moment of Slaanesh's birth occurred when this accumulated psychic energy reached critical mass, creating a cascade reaction that consumed the souls of nearly every Eldar in the galaxy in a single instant. The psychic scream that accompanied this event tore a permanent hole in reality, creating the Eye of Terror and transforming vast regions of space into hellish landscapes where the laws of physics no longer applied. The Prince of Pleasure emerged from this catastrophe as a fully formed deity, possessing power that rivaled gods who had taken millions of years to achieve consciousness. Slaanesh's domain within the warp reflects the obsession with perfection and sensation that gave birth to the Prince of Pleasure. The Palace of Pleasure stands as a monument to aesthetic achievement, its architecture combining elements from every civilization that has ever existed in forms that transcend normal concepts of beauty and harmony. Every surface gleams with precious metals and gems that seem to generate their own light, while the air itself shimmers with colors that exist beyond the normal spectrum of visible light. The palace's countless chambers cater to every conceivable desire and fantasy, from halls where music of impossible complexity plays continuously to galleries filled with artworks that can drive viewers mad with their perfection. Gardens of living, crystal-grow flowers that sing in harmonious choirs, while pools of liquid silver reflect not the viewer's appearance but their deepest desires and secret shames. Every aspect of the palace is designed to overwhelm the senses while simultaneously creating an insatiable hunger for even greater experiences. Slaanesh's servants embody the Prince of Pleasure's nature through their pursuit of absolute perfection in their chosen forms of excess. The Keepers of Secrets, towering greater demons that serve as Slaanesh's primary agents, combine masculine and feminine characteristics in ways that transcend mortal concepts of beauty and horror. These creatures possess 4 arms that end in razor-sharp claws capable of both creating exquisite works of art and inflicting wounds that cause as much pleasure as pain. Their voices can shift from seductive whispers that promise ultimate fulfillment to piercing shrieks that shatter both glass and sanity, while their serpentine lower bodies allow them to move with a hypnotic grace that mesmerizes observers even as it signals their approaching doom. The nature of demonic existence represents one of the most fundamental aspects of chaos corruption, as these entities exist as living embodiments of pure emotion, given form through the concentrated psychic energy of the warp. Unlike mortal beings who possess souls that exist independently of their physical forms, demons are their emotions, lacking any separate identity beyond the specific aspect of sentient experience they represent. A bloodletter exists solely as crystallized rage and bloodlust, while a plaguebearer embodies acceptance of decay and methodical record-keeping. This fundamental difference means that demons cannot truly be killed in the conventional sense, as destroying their physical manifestation merely disperses their essence back into the warp currents from which they originally coalesced. The relationship between demons and their patron gods operates according to principles that mortal minds struggle to comprehend. Each demon exists as both an independent entity and a fragment of their god's consciousness, simultaneously possessing individual agency while remaining absolutely bound to their creator's will. This paradoxical existence allows greater demons to develop distinct personalities and pursue their own schemes while never being able to act against their patron's fundamental nature. A Lord of Change might spend centuries orchestrating elaborate plots that serve its own ambitions, but these schemes invariably advance Tzeentch's greater designs, even when the demon believes it is acting independently. The dependence of demonic entities on psychic energy creates both their greatest strength and their most significant vulnerability. Within the warp, where psychic energy flows freely and reality itself responds to emotional resonance, demons can achieve feats that defy all natural laws. They can reshape their forms at will, manipulate time and space through focused intention, and draw upon the accumulated power of their patron gods to perform acts of devastating supernatural force. However, when manifesting in real space, demons become increasingly vulnerable as they are cut off from the constant flow of psychic energy that sustains their existence in the Immaterium. The process of demonic manifestation in the material universe requires specific conditions that create temporary bridges between dimensions. Psychic disturbances caused by untrained psychers, the performance of blasphemous rituals, or the presence of warp storms can weaken the barriers that normally separate real space from the Immaterium. These weak points allow demons to force their way through, but maintaining physical form in a dimension governed by natural laws rather than psychic resonance requires constant expenditure of energy. Minor demons might persist for only minutes or hours before their essence dissipates back into the warp, while greater demons can maintain manifestation for extended periods by feeding on the fear and other emotions they generate in mortal witnesses. The hierarchies within each Chaos God's demonic legions reflect both the nature of their patron and the fundamental principles that govern warp entities. These structures are not imposed from above like mortal military organizations, but arise naturally from the interaction between different concentrations of psychic energy within each god's domain. Greater demons represent the most concentrated and stable accumulations of their patron's essential nature, possessing power and intelligence that allows them to command lesser entities, while serving as direct extensions of their god's will. Within Khorne's domain, the hierarchy operates according to principles of martial prowess and the ability to spill blood in the blood god's name. Bloodthirsters stand at the apex of this structure, massive winged demons whose presence on any battlefield can turn the tide of entire wars. These creatures possess strength that allows them to cleave through tank armor with their bare hands, while their massive axes can split mountains and their whips of living flame can lash out across impossible distances. Each bloodthirster has earned its position through countless eons of slaughter, their bodies bearing scars from battles fought across the galaxy's history. Despite their individual power, these greater demons constantly compete with each other for Khorne's favor, engaging in duels that can reshape entire regions of the warp through their violence. Beneath the bloodthirsters, the Herald-level demons serve as field commanders and champions of specific aspects of warfare. Bloodmasters lead formations of lesser demons with tactical acumen honed through millennia of conflict, while Rendmasters specialize in the art of torture and the extraction of suffering from captured enemies. Skullmasters ride upon juggernauts of Khorne, demon engines that combine the ferocity of living beings with the unstoppable momentum of supernatural machinery. These Herald-level entities possess enough individual power to challenge mortal champions, while maintaining the strategic thinking necessary to coordinate large-scale military operations. The bulk of Khorne's demonic legions consists of bloodletters, lesser demons that exist as pure expressions of the desire to kill and maim. These creatures stand roughly human-sized, but possess strength and speed that far exceeds mortal limitations. Their hellblades can cut through any material substance, while their brass armor provides protection against both physical and psychic attacks. Bloodletters lack the capacity for complex thought beyond their martial function, but this limitation makes them perfectly suited to their role as the blood god's primary infantry. They fight with a coordination that comes not from training, but from their shared nature as fragments of the same fundamental emotion. Supporting these core troops are various specialized demon types that serve specific functions within Khorne's war machine. Fleshhounds track fleeing enemies across impossible distances, their supernatural senses capable of following psychic sense through both real space and the warp. These creatures possess in particular hatred for psychers, as their very existence as beings of pure physical violence conflicts with the reality-altering powers that psychic individuals wield. Skull cannons serve as artillery pieces, demon engines that fire the skulls of the honored dead with enough force to demolish fortifications, while the screaming faces carved into their bronze surfaces provide targeting information through supernatural perception. Tzeentch's demonic hierarchy operates according to entirely different principles, reflecting the architect of fate's nature as a god of knowledge, change, and complex schemes. The Lords of Change that serve as his greater demons possess intellects that can process multiple timelines simultaneously, allowing them to perceive potential futures and manipulate causality through carefully planned interventions. These creatures appear as massive avian beings whose feathers constantly shift through colors that exist beyond the normal spectrum, while their eyes burn with the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that have risen and fallen across galactic history. Each Lord of Change pursues schemes of staggering complexity that may take millennia to reach fruition, their plans involving hundreds of seemingly unrelated events that combine to produce specific outcomes. These greater demons serve simultaneously as generals, scholars, and prophets within Tzeentch's domain, their ability to see potential futures making them invaluable assets in the eternal game of cosmic manipulation that their patron plays against his rivals. However, their very nature as beings of change means that they are incapable of maintaining consistent goals or alliances, as their fundamental essence compels them to constantly alter their plans and betray their allies when doing so serves the greater cause of transformation. The heralds that serve beneath the Lords of Change specialize in different aspects of Tzeentch's portfolio. Changecasters focus on the manipulation of reality through sorcery, their mastery of warp energies allowing them to reshape matter and energy according to their will. Fateskimmers ride upon discs of Tzeentch, demon engines that exist as living manifestations of the concept of change itself, their crystalline surfaces reflecting not the current reality, but the various potential futures that might result from different choices. Fluxmasters command formations of lesser demons through a combination of telepathic coordination and the promise of revelation, offering glimpses of forbidden knowledge to those who serve faithfully. The pink horrors that form the backbone of Tzeentch's legions embody the chaotic nature of change itself. These creatures cackle with maniacal glee as they hurl bolts of warp fire at their enemies, their unstable forms constantly shifting between different configurations, as their very existence defies attempts at consistent description. When destroyed, pink horrors split into two blue horrors, smaller but more vicious creatures that burn with cold flame and bitter resentment at their reduced status. This process of division continues even further, as blue horrors can split into pairs of brimstone horrors, tiny sprites of pure malice that exist solely to spread the fires of change wherever they encounter stability or order. Tzeentch's demon engines reflect his nature as a god of sorcery and forbidden knowledge. Burning chariots streak across battlefields, while trailing flames that burn not just physical matter, but the very concepts of permanence and stability. Screamers of Tzeentch swim through both air and solid matter as if they were liquid, their crystalline teeth capable of devouring not just flesh and metal, but also memories and dreams. These creatures serve as living weapons that attack their targets on multiple levels simultaneously, destroying both physical form and psychological coherence through their supernatural abilities. Nurgle's demonic hierarchy reflects the Lord of Decay's philosophy of acceptance and the democratic nature of entropy that affects all living beings equally. The great unclean ones that serve as his greater demons embody this approach through their grotesque but strangely paternal nature. These massive creatures possess bodies that are simultaneously repulsive and fascinating, their rotting flesh alive with countless forms of bacterial and viral life that exist in perfect symbiosis with their demonic essence. Despite their horrifying appearance, great unclean ones speak in gentle, grandfatherly tones about the beauty of decay and the comfort that can be found in accepting one's inevitable fate. Each great unclean one maintains its own garden within Nurgle's domain, cultivating new forms of disease and decay with the enthusiasm of a master horticulturist. These creatures take genuine pride in their work, approaching the creation of new plagues with artistic sensibility that seeks to balance virulence with aesthetic appeal. Their presence on battlefields spreads clouds of toxic gas and swarms of disease-carrying insects, but they conduct their warfare with an air of sad necessity rather than malicious glee, viewing the destruction they cause as simply another aspect of the natural cycle of death and renewal. The heralds that serve beneath the great unclean ones specialize in different aspects of Nurgle's portfolio. Poxbringers focus on the creation and spread of disease, their bloated forms serving as living laboratories where new forms of plague are constantly being developed and refined. Spolpox scriveners maintain detailed records of every death and act of decay that occurs throughout the galaxy, their ledgers serving as comprehensive catalogs of entropy's progress. Sloppity bilepipers provide musical accompaniment to Nurgle's legions, their diseased instruments producing melodies that can induce madness, despair, or paradoxical feelings of acceptance and belonging. The plague-bearers that make up the bulk of Nurgle's demonic forces reflect his more methodical aspects, serving as the accountants and record-keepers of decay. These creatures maintain detailed tallies of every disease, every death, and every act of corruption that occurs throughout the galaxy, their single eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for new phenomena to catalog. Despite their single-minded focus on documentation, plague-bearers possess a strange form of contentment that comes from their absolute certainty about their purpose and place in the cosmic order. Nurgle's demon engines embody his philosophy of finding beauty in decay and corruption. Plague drones buzz across battlefields on rotting wings, their riders spreading clouds of toxic spores while maintaining detailed observations of the destruction they cause. Beasts of Nurgle represent the plague god's more playful aspects, appearing as massive slug-like creatures that approach potential victims with the enthusiasm of puppies seeking attention, seemingly unaware that their toxic secretions and crushing embraces prove fatal to most forms of life. Slaanesh's demonic hierarchy operates according to principles of aesthetic perfection and the pursuit of ultimate sensation. The keepers of secrets that serve as greater demons combine masculine and feminine characteristics in ways that transcend mortal concepts of beauty and horror, their four-armed forms capable of both creating exquisite works of art and inflicting wounds that cause as much pleasure as pain. These creatures possess voices that can shift from seductive whispers promising ultimate fulfillment to piercing shrieks that shatter both glass and sanity, while their serpentine lower bodies allow them to move with hypnotic grace that mesmerizes observers even as it signals their approaching doom. Each keeper of secrets pursues its own vision of perfection, whether through the creation of impossible artworks, the orchestration of elaborate schemes that unfold like complex musical compositions, or the cultivation of mortal followers whose corruption serves as a testament to the demon's skill at manipulation. These greater demons view their existence as an ongoing performance, with every action carefully calculated to produce maximum aesthetic and emotional impact on their audiences. The heralds that serve beneath the keepers of secrets specialize in different aspects of Slaanesh's nature. Infernal and Rapturouses lead demon orchestras that produce music of such perfection that mortal listeners often die from the intensity of the emotional response it provokes. Vice leaders command formations of lesser demons through a combination of inspiration and intimidation, their presence on the battlefield serving to heighten both the courage of allies and the terror of enemies. Soul hunters seek out individuals whose corruption would serve Slaanesh's purposes, stalking their prey across both real space and the warp with the patience of master predators. The demonettes that form the core of Slaanesh's legions embody the Prince of Pleasure's nature as beings that combine attraction and revulsion in equal measure. These creatures possess an androgynous beauty that can entrance observers of any species or gender preference, but their crab-like claws and predatory nature quickly reveal the danger they represent. Demonettes move with fluid grace that makes their actions appear choreographed, turning even the most brutal combat into a form of deadly dance that celebrates both the beauty and horror of violence. Beyond the organized legions of the four ruinous powers, the warp contains numerous entities that represent the elevation of mortals to demonic status through various means. Demon princes occupy a unique position within the hierarchies of chaos, as they retain memories and personalities from their mortal existence while possessing power that can rival lesser greater demons. These beings represent the ultimate reward that the chaos gods can bestow upon their most successful servants, transformation into immortal entities that combine mortal cunning with supernatural abilities. The process of ascension to demon prince status requires not just the favor of a chaos god, but also the sacrifice of one's humanity in ways that go far beyond simple corruption. The mortal must prove their dedication through acts of such significance that they reshape the very fabric of reality around them, creating permanent changes in both the material universe and the warp itself. This might involve the corruption of entire star systems, the orchestration of galaxy-spanning conflicts, or the discovery of forbidden knowledge that fundamentally alters the nature of existence itself. Demon princes retain enough of their mortal memories and personality to pursue personal agendas that extend beyond simple service to their patron gods. This makes them particularly dangerous opponents, as they combine supernatural power with strategic thinking and personal motivation that purely demonic entities often lack. Their ability to understand mortal psychology and exploit human weaknesses makes them exceptionally effective at corrupting entire populations and turning loyal imperial citizens into willing servants of chaos. Possessed mortals represent another form of hybrid entity that bridges the gap between the material realm and the Immaterium. These individuals have allowed demonic entities to share their physical forms, creating beings that combine mortal flesh with supernatural power. The process of possession can occur through voluntary invitation, as in the case of chaos cultists who seek to gain power through demonic alliance, or through involuntary invasion when psychic defenses prove insufficient to resist demonic assault. The nature of possession varies significantly depending on the strength of both the demon and the mortal host. Weak demons might be able to influence their host's behavior only subtly, creating gradual personality changes that slowly corrupt the individual over time. Stronger entities can assume direct control of their host's actions, using the mortal body as a vehicle for manifesting their power in real space. The most powerful possessions create beings that exist as true fusions of mortal and demon, neither fully human nor completely supernatural, but combining aspects of both in ways that can prove more dangerous than either component alone. The warp also contains numerous independent entities that exist outside the dominion of the four ruinous powers, creatures that have evolved within the Immaterium according to their own alien logic and purposes. These beings represent aspects of sentient experience that do not fall neatly into the categories claimed by Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh, or they predate the formation of the major chaos gods and have managed to maintain their independence through various means. Enslavers represent one of the most ancient and dangerous categories of independent warp entities. These creatures existed within the Immaterium long before the war in heaven, feeding on psychic energy and using their ability to dominate minds to create puppet civilizations that serve their needs. Enslavers appear as jellyfish-like beings with multiple tentacles that end in sensory organs, capable of detecting psychic emanations across vast distances. When they encounter a suitable host, they attach themselves to the victim's nervous system and assume control of their actions, while feeding on the psychic energy generated by the host's terror and despair. The threat posed by enslavers extends far beyond individual possession, as these creatures can rapidly spread through populations of psychically sensitive individuals. A single enslaver can dominate dozens of hosts simultaneously, using them to perform rituals that weaken the barriers between dimensions and allow more of their kind to manifest in real space. Historical records suggest that enslaver invasions have been responsible for the collapse of several advanced civilizations, including some that possessed technology and psychic abilities that exceeded current imperial capabilities. Psychnuine represent another category of independent warp predator that poses significant threats to psychers and other psychically active individuals. These creatures appear as massive moths or butterflies whose wings shimmer with colors that exist beyond the normal spectrum of visible light. Psychnuine feed on psychic energy in its raw form, draining the life force from their victims while laying eggs within their brain tissue. The larvae that hatch from these eggs consume their host from within, eventually emerging as fully grown Psychnuine, ready to continue the cycle of predation. The hunting behavior of Psychnuine makes them particularly dangerous to Imperial Psychers and other individuals who regularly use psychic powers. These creatures can track psychic emanations across both real space and the warp, following their prey with the persistence of bloodhounds and the cunning of intelligent predators. Their ability to phase between dimensions allows them to bypass most forms of physical protection, while their psychic draining abilities can quickly incapacitate even powerful psychers who are caught unprepared. Various other categories of independent warp entities exist throughout the Immaterium, each representing different aspects of the realm's chaotic nature. Psychic parasites attach themselves to individuals with latent psychic abilities, gradually draining their life force while remaining undetected by conventional means. Shadow entities exist as living darkness that feeds on fear and despair, growing stronger as they terrorize their victims. Warp wraiths represent the corrupted souls of individuals who died under particularly traumatic circumstances, their essence twisted by the experience into malevolent spirits that seek to inflict similar suffering on the living. The eternal struggles for dominance within the warp create a constantly shifting landscape of alliances, betrayals, and conflicts that span both individual entities and entire categories of demon. These struggles occur on multiple levels simultaneously, from the cosmic game played between the ruinous powers themselves to the petty rivalries between individual lesser demons seeking to advance their position within their patron's hierarchy. The constant warfare between demonic entities and the endless schemes of the ruinous powers represented only one aspect of the Immaterium's threat to humanity's survival. While Imperial scholars and military commanders focused their attention on the immediate dangers posed by warp storms, demon incursions, and chaos corruption, the Master of Mankind understood that humanity's dependence on warp travel itself represented an existential vulnerability that would eventually doom the species. Every journey through the Sea of Souls exposed Imperial vessels and their crews to the corrupting influence of chaos, while the astronomic and psychic beacon required the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers to maintain its guiding light across the galaxy's vast distances. The Emperor's solution to this fundamental problem lay not in attempting to master the warp's chaotic energies, but in bypassing the Immaterium entirely through the construction of an Imperial webway that would provide humanity with safe passage between the stars. This ambitious undertaking represented perhaps the most significant engineering project in galactic history, requiring the combination of ancient Eldar technology with innovations that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The scope of the Emperor's vision extended far beyond simple transportation, encompassing a complete transformation of human civilization that would free the species from its dependence on psychers, eliminate the threat of demon incursion, and create a golden age of expansion and prosperity that would span millennia. The foundation for this grand design lay in the Emperor's deep understanding of the webway's construction and operation, knowledge gained through millennia of study and direct interaction with its Eldar creators. The ancient network of tunnels that connected distant points in real space without requiring passage through the warp represented a technology that predated the fall by millions of years, its creators having recognized the dangers inherent in direct Immaterium travel long before the birth of Slaanesh made such journeys truly perilous. The webway's tunnels existed as carefully constructed tubes of psychically reinforced reality that maintained their integrity through a combination of advanced materials and constant psychic maintenance, creating stable pathways that remained isolated from the warp's chaotic currents. Beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, in chambers that extended deep into the planet's crust, the Emperor established a secret laboratory complex that would serve as the focal point for his webway project. These vast underground facilities remained hidden from all but the Emperor's most trusted servants, their existence concealed behind layers of psychic barriers and technological defenses that made detection virtually impossible. The scale of the construction dwarfed even the palace's visible structures, with excavated chambers large enough to house entire starships and manufacturing facilities capable of producing materials that existed nowhere else in the Imperium. The Golden Throne, that magnificent artifact that would later become both symbol and prison for the Master of Mankind, originally served as the primary psychic amplifier for the webway project. This incredible device combined archaeotech systems of incomprehensible complexity with psychic focusing crystals that could channel and direct the Emperor's immense mental powers with precision that exceeded even his natural abilities. The throne's neural interface systems allowed the Emperor to extend his consciousness across vast distances while maintaining the delicate psychic manipulations required to construct stable webway tunnels. Its sophisticated monitoring equipment providing constant feedback about the project's progress and the structural integrity of completed sections. The construction process itself required techniques that blended advanced engineering with psychic manipulation in ways that challenged conventional understanding of both disciplines. Each section of the Imperial webway had to be carefully shaped from materials that could maintain their coherence while existing partially outside normal spacetime, their molecular structure reinforced through psychic resonance that prevented degradation from warp exposure. The Emperor's role in this construction extended beyond simple oversight, as his personal psychic signature provided the binding force that held each tunnel segment together while preventing incursion from the chaotic energies that surrounded them. Teams of the Emperor's most skilled artisans and technicians worked in shifts that could last for months, their activities coordinated through psychic communication that allowed for precision impossible through conventional means. These craftsmen represented the pinnacle of human achievement in their respective fields, individuals whose skills had been honed through decades of training and whose loyalty to the Emperor remained absolute. Many possessed minor psychic abilities that allowed them to perceive the subtle energy patterns that governed webway construction, while others had been enhanced through genetic modification or cybernetic augmentation to better interface with the exotic technologies required for the project. The materials used in webway construction came from sources scattered across the galaxy, with some components requiring extraction from worlds where reality itself had been altered by prolonged warp exposure. Wraithbone, the psychically responsive material favored by Eldar craftsmen, had to be carefully harvested and processed to remove the psychic imprints left by its original creators. Crystalline matrices grown in zero-gravity environments provided the structural framework for psychic focusing arrays, while exotic metals that existed only in the hearts of dying stars were shaped into conduits capable of channeling energies that would vaporize conventional materials. The Emperor's personal involvement in every aspect of the project reflected both the technical complexity of the undertaking and the security requirements that surrounded it. His psychic abilities allowed him to perceive flaws and instabilities that would remain invisible to conventional sensors, while his vast knowledge of both human and Xenos technology enabled him to develop solutions to problems that would have stymied lesser minds. The Master of Mankind spent countless hours in deep meditation within the Golden Throne's neural interfaces, his consciousness extending through partially completed tunnel sections as he guided their growth and reinforced their structural integrity. Progress on the Imperial webway proceeded steadily throughout the early decades of the Great Crusade, with completed sections extending outward from Terra toward key strategic locations throughout the galaxy. The Emperor's long-term vision encompassed a network that would eventually connect every major Imperial world, allowing for instantaneous communication and transportation that would transform the Imperium from a loose confederation of systems into a truly unified galactic civilization. Administrative efficiency would increase dramatically when officials could travel between worlds in minutes rather than months, while military responses to threats could be coordinated with precision that would make rebellion or Xenos aggression virtually impossible to sustain. The economic implications of the completed webway network were equally staggering, as the elimination of warp travel risks would reduce transportation costs while enabling trade relationships that were currently impossible due to distance and danger. Worlds that had remained isolated due to their location in warp storm zones would suddenly become accessible, their resources and populations integrated into the greater Imperial economy. The need for the massive fleets of transport vessels that currently carried goods and personnel between systems would be dramatically reduced, freeing up resources for other projects while eliminating the constant attrition caused by vessels lost to warp storms and demon attacks. Perhaps most significantly, the completion of the Imperial webway would eliminate humanity's dependence on psychers for interstellar navigation and communication. The Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon that required the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers to maintain, would become obsolete as webway tunnels provided their own navigation references. The navigator houses, whose genetic mutations and psychic abilities had made them indispensable to imperial civilization, would find their services no longer required, as conventional pilots could guide vessels through the stable environment of webway tunnels. This transformation would free humanity from one of its greatest vulnerabilities, while simultaneously reducing the risks associated with widespread psychic activity. The Emperor's plans for managing humanity's psychic evolution extended far beyond simply eliminating the need for psychers in transportation and communication. The Master of Mankind understood that psychic abilities represented both humanity's greatest potential and its most dangerous weakness, as every psyker served as a potential gateway for demonic incursion. His long-term vision encompassed a careful program of genetic and cultural evolution that would gradually reduce the frequency of psychic manifestation while channeling those abilities that did emerge toward constructive rather than destructive purposes. The secrecy surrounding the Webway project reflected both its strategic importance and the potential consequences of its discovery by hostile forces. The Emperor understood that knowledge of the project's existence would make it a target for every enemy of humanity, from chaos cults seeking to corrupt the tunnels to Xeno civilizations that viewed human expansion as a threat to their own survival. The Eldar, in particular, would likely view any attempt to access their ancient webway network as an act of theft and desecration, potentially triggering conflicts that could jeopardize the entire undertaking. Even within the highest levels of imperial government, knowledge of the Webway project remained strictly compartmentalized. The Primarchs, despite their roles as the Emperor's most trusted generals and administrators, were not informed of the project's existence or its strategic implications. This decision reflected the Emperor's understanding that even his gene-forged sons might not fully appreciate the necessity of maintaining absolute secrecy, while their own ambitions and interpretations of imperial policy might lead them to actions that could compromise the project's security. The technical challenges involved in webway construction required constant innovation and adaptation, as the project encountered obstacles that had no precedent in human experience. The intersection points where new imperial tunnels connected to existing Eldar infrastructure proved particularly problematic, as the psychic resonance frequencies used by human and Eldar construction techniques often conflicted in ways that could destabilize entire sections. The Emperor's personal intervention was frequently required to resolve these compatibility issues, his unique understanding of both technologies allowing him to develop hybrid solutions that maintained the integrity of both systems. Quality control measures for the Webway project exceeded even the exacting standards typically applied to imperial military equipment, as any structural failure could result in catastrophic breaches that would allow warp entities direct access to the tunnel network. Each completed section underwent extensive testing that could last for months, with teams of specialists monitoring every aspect of the tunnel's performance under various stress conditions. The Emperor himself conducted final inspections of critical sections, his psychic senses capable of detecting flaws that would remain invisible to conventional analysis methods. The project's timeline stretched across decades, with completion dates constantly adjusted as new challenges emerged and technical solutions required refinement. The Emperor's original estimates had assumed that certain aspects of Eldar technology could be more easily adapted to human use, but the reality of working with psychically active materials proved more complex than anticipated. Each breakthrough in understanding often revealed new layers of complexity that required additional research and development, while the need to maintain absolute secrecy limited the number of personnel who could be assigned to critical tasks. Magnus the Red's psychic abilities and scholarly nature made him uniquely qualified to appreciate the Webway project's significance, though his father had not seen fit to share details of the undertaking with him. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns possessed an understanding of warp phenomena that exceeded that of most imperial scholars, his studies of psychic theory and practical experience with sorcerous techniques providing him with insights that would have proven invaluable to the project's development. However, the Emperor's decision to maintain secrecy meant that Magnus remained unaware of his father's greatest work, a decision that would have catastrophic consequences when the Primarch's loyalty was tested by the corruption of his brother Horus. The discovery of Horus's fall to chaos represented exactly the kind of crisis that the Emperor had hoped the completed webway would help prevent. The Warmaster's corruption had occurred during an expedition to a world where the barriers between real space and the warp had been weakened by ancient conflicts. His exposure to chaos influences facilitated by the very interstellar travel methods that the Webway project was designed to replace. Magnus's desperate attempt to warn his father of this betrayal demonstrated both the limitations of conventional psychic communication and the tragic irony of a situation where the solution to humanity's problems was nearly complete but not yet operational. Magnus's psychic message to Terra required him to gather and focus energies of unprecedented magnitude, drawing power from sources that he did not fully understand in his desperation to breach the psychic barriers that surrounded the Imperial Palace. The Primarch's noble intentions could not overcome the fundamental laws that governed psychic phenomena, as his attempt to force a connection across galactic distances created exactly the kind of warp disturbance that the Emperor's defenses were designed to prevent. The psychic shockwave generated by Magnus's effort tore through the carefully constructed barriers that protected the Webway project, creating breaches that allowed demonic entities direct access to the tunnel network. The catastrophic demon invasion that followed Magnus's psychic breach represented one of the most significant disasters in Imperial history, transforming the Emperor's greatest achievement into humanity's most dangerous vulnerability. Thousands of demons poured through the ruptured barriers, their presence within the Webway tunnels threatening to corrupt the entire network and create permanent gateways between Terra and the deepest regions of the warp. The entities that manifested ranged from lesser demons seeking to spread chaos and destruction to greater powers, whose very presence began to alter the fundamental structure of the tunnel system itself. The Emperor's response to this crisis required him to abandon decades of careful work and assume direct control of the psychic barriers that contain the demonic incursion. His consciousness, previously focused on the gradual construction and expansion of the Webway network, was forced to shift to a purely defensive role as he struggled to prevent the complete collapse of the tunnel system. The Golden Throne, designed as a tool for creation and expansion, became a prison as the Emperor found himself unable to leave its neural interfaces without allowing the demon horde to break free and overrun Terra itself. The immediate tactical situation within the compromised Webway tunnels required military intervention on a scale that matched the psychic crisis. The Emperor deployed the Legio Custodes, his personal guard of genetically enhanced warriors, into the tunnel network to engage the demon forces in direct combat. These elite troops, equipped with weapons and armor that incorporated the finest technologies available to the Imperium, found themselves fighting in an environment where conventional tactics and equipment faced challenges that no amount of training could fully prepare them for. The Custodians' battles within the Webway tunnels took place in locations where reality itself had become unstable due to demonic presence. Gravity operated according to the whims of chaos entities rather than natural laws, while the passage of time became fluid and unpredictable. Warriors who entered certain sections of the tunnel network might emerge to find that hours had passed in the outside world, while they experienced only minutes of subjective time, or vice versa. The very architecture of the tunnels began to shift and change as demonic influence corrupted the psychically responsive materials from which they were constructed. Despite the heroic efforts of the Custodian Guard and the Emperor's personal intervention, the damage to the Webway project proved irreversible. The psychic barriers that had taken decades to construct and calibrate were shattered beyond repair, while the demon presence within the tunnel network created permanent contamination that made large sections unusable. The Emperor's forced confinement to the Golden Throne meant that no further expansion of the network was possible, as his consciousness remained locked in an eternal struggle to maintain the barriers that prevented complete catastrophe. The strategic implications of the Webway project's failure extended far beyond the immediate crisis on Terra. Humanity's dependence on warp travel would continue indefinitely, ensuring that every journey between the stars carried the risk of chaos, corruption, and demon incursion. The Astronomicon would require its constant sacrifice of psychers, while the navigator houses would maintain their stranglehold on interstellar commerce and communication. Most significantly, the Emperor's vision of humanity's evolution beyond its current psychic vulnerabilities was indefinitely postponed, leaving the species trapped in a cycle of dependence on the very forces that threatened its destruction. The Emperor's confinement to the Golden Throne also meant that his direct guidance and intervention in imperial affairs would be severely limited. The Master of Mankind, who had personally led the Great Crusade and shaped every aspect of imperial policy, found himself reduced to a largely passive role, as his consciousness remained focused on maintaining the psychic barriers that protected Terra from demonic invasion. This transformation would have profound consequences for the Imperium's future development, as the loss of the Emperor's active leadership created power vacuums that would be filled by individuals whose vision and capabilities fell far short of their predecessors' achievements. The failure of the Emperor's Webway project condemned humanity to an eternal dependence on the most perilous form of interstellar travel ever devised. With the Master of Mankind bound to the Golden Throne and his grand vision reduced to smoldering ruins beneath Terra, the Imperium faced the grim reality that every journey between the stars would require passage through the nightmare realm of the warp. This fundamental vulnerability shaped every aspect of imperial civilization, from the design of spacecraft to the structure of interstellar commerce, creating a civilization that existed in constant tension between the necessity of warp travel and the existential dangers it represented. The principles governing warp translation operate according to laws that bear little resemblance to conventional physics, requiring technologies and techniques that push human understanding to its absolute limits. When an Imperial vessel prepares for warp entry, its crew initiates a complex sequence of procedures that must be executed with precision bordering on ritual. The ship's warp drive creates a localized distortion in spacetime that allows the vessel to slip sideways from real space into the Immaterium, where distances that might span hundreds of light years in the material universe can be traversed in a fraction of the time required for conventional travel. The moment of translation itself represents one of the most dangerous phases of any warp journey, as the vessel must maintain structural and psychic integrity while transitioning between dimensions governed by fundamentally different natural laws. The ship's hull experiences stresses that would tear apart any structure not specifically designed for warp travel, while the crew endures psychological pressures that can drive unprepared individuals to madness or worse. Imperial naval architects have spent millennia refining hull designs that can withstand these forces, incorporating blessed metals and sanctified components that provide both physical strength and spiritual protection against the warp's corrupting influence. Geller fields represent the most critical technology in humanity's arsenal for surviving warp travel, creating protective barriers that maintain a bubble of real space physics around Imperial vessels during their passage through the Immaterium. These devices generate complex energy patterns that interact with the ship's hull plating to create a multidimensional shield capable of deflecting both physical and psychic attacks from warp entities. The field generators themselves incorporate archaeotech components, whose functions remain only partially understood by Imperial technicians, their construction requiring materials and manufacturing techniques that exist nowhere else in the Imperium's industrial base. The operation of Geller field systems requires constant monitoring and adjustment throughout a vessel's warp transit, as the chaotic energies of the Immaterium constantly probe for weaknesses in the protective barrier. Fluctuations in field strength that might seem minor to untrained observers can create gaps large enough for demon entities to exploit, while complete field failure represents a death sentence for everyone aboard the affected vessel. Imperial records contain thousands of accounts describing ships found drifting in real space with their Geller fields offline, their crews transformed into gibbering madmen or worse by exposure to the warp's raw energies. The human cost of maintaining Geller field operations extends beyond the technical crew responsible for their function. The psychic resonance generated by these devices creates a constant low-level stress on everyone within their protective envelope, manifesting as headaches, nightmares, and a persistent sense of unease that experienced void crews learn to accept as the price of survival. Extended warp transits can produce more severe psychological effects, including temporary psychosis, prophetic dreams, and occasional cases of spontaneous psychic awakening among previously normal crew members. Navigator mutations represent both humanity's greatest advantage in warp travel and a constant reminder of the price paid for survival in the 41st millennium. The genetic modifications that allow navigator families to perceive safe passages through the warp's chaotic currents were originally introduced during the Dark Age of technology, when human scientists attempted to create a stable population of individuals capable of guiding ships through the Immaterium without relying on artificial intelligence systems. The success of this genetic engineering project came at a terrible cost, as the mutations required for warpsight inevitably produced physical and psychological changes that marked navigators as something other than baseline human. The third eye that serves as the primary organ of warp perception appears as a vertical slit in the navigator's forehead, typically concealed behind ornate headbands or cybernetic implants when not in active use. When opened, this organ allows the navigator to perceive the warp's currents and eddies as visible phenomena, transforming the chaotic energies of the Immaterium into patterns that can be interpreted and navigated. The experience of warpsight defies easy description, as navigators report seeing colors that exist beyond the normal spectrum, geometric forms that violate conventional mathematics, and distances that change based on the observer's emotional state. The physical toll of using warpsight accumulates over time, with veteran navigators developing increasingly severe mutations as their exposure to Immaterium energies gradually reshapes their genetic structure. These changes can include additional limbs or sensory organs, alterations to bone structure that create inhuman proportions, and skin conditions that range from unusual pigmentation to scales or chitinous growths. The most experienced navigators often become so physically altered that they can no longer appear in public without causing panic among baseline humans, their appearance serving as a living reminder of the mutations that warp exposure inevitably produces. The psychological effects of prolonged warpsight use prove equally dramatic, as navigators develop mental capabilities and perceptual frameworks that increasingly diverge from normal human consciousness. Many report experiencing prophetic visions during their navigation duties, perceiving potential futures that may or may not come to pass depending on the choices made by those they guide. Others develop an enhanced understanding of probability and causation that allows them to make intuitive leaps that seem impossible to baseline humans, but prove remarkably accurate in practice. Navigator houses maintain their monopoly on warp navigation through ancient compacts with Terra that grant them exclusive rights to provide guidance services to Imperial vessels. These agreements, negotiated during the early centuries of the Imperium's expansion, recognize the navigator families as essential partners in humanity's conquest of the galaxy, while establishing legal frameworks that protected their interests and ensured their continued cooperation. The political power wielded by the major navigator houses rivals that of planetary governors and imperial commanders, as their ability to grant or withhold navigation services gives them tremendous leverage in negotiations with other imperial institutions. The internal politics of navigator houses operate according to principles that combine traditional aristocratic hierarchies with the unique requirements of their genetic heritage. Marriages between navigator families require careful consideration of genetic compatibility to ensure that offspring possess the mutations necessary for warp sight, while avoiding the more extreme deformations that can result from excessive inbreeding. These political alliances often span centuries, with marriage contracts negotiated decades in advance to secure favorable terms for both families involved. The training required to become a functional navigator begins in early childhood and continues throughout the individual's career, as the complexities of warp navigation cannot be mastered through conventional education methods. Young navigators spend years learning to interpret the subtle variations in warp current patterns, studying historical records of successful and failed transits, and developing the mental discipline required to maintain focus while exposed to the Immaterium's chaotic energies. The most promising students receive additional training in the political and commercial aspects of their profession, preparing them for leadership roles within their family's business operations. The extreme dangers faced by vessels attempting to traverse the Immaterium extend far beyond the mechanical failures and navigation errors that plague conventional space travel. Warp storms represent perhaps the most significant threat to Imperial shipping, as these massive disturbances in the Immaterium's fabric can trap vessels for subjective centuries, while only days pass in real space. Ships caught in major warp storms may emerge to find that their destination worlds have been conquered, destroyed, or forgotten entirely, their crews aging decades during transits that should have lasted only weeks. The Great Rift that split the galaxy during the 13th Black Crusade created the largest warp storm in recorded history, effectively dividing the Imperium into two separate regions, with severely limited communication and transportation between them. This massive psychic wound continues to expand and contract according to patterns that defy prediction, occasionally allowing brief windows of opportunity for vessels to cross between the galaxy's northern and southern regions. The unpredictable nature of these openings means that fleets attempting such crossings face enormous risks, with success rates that barely exceed 50% even for the most experienced navigator crews. Temporal anomalies within the warp create additional complications for interstellar travel, as the Immaterium's non-linear relationship with time can produce paradoxes and impossibilities that challenge conventional understanding of causality. Imperial vessels have occasionally arrived at their destinations before they departed, creating logical contradictions that strain the sanity of everyone involved. More commonly, ships experience time dilation effects that can result in crews aging years during transits that appear to last only hours from external observation, or the reverse situation where subjectively long journeys correspond to minimal elapsed time in real space. The ever-present threat of demonic incursion during warp translation represents the most insidious danger faced by Imperial shipping, as these supernatural attacks can occur without warning and prove impossible to defend against through conventional means. Demon entities drawn to the psychic emanations generated by human consciousness can penetrate even functional Geller fields through subtle means, possessing crew members or manifesting within the ship's corridors to spread corruption and chaos. The signs of demonic presence often remain subtle until the infestation has progressed beyond containment, with possessed individuals maintaining normal behavior patterns while gradually corrupting their shipmates through seemingly innocent interactions. The loss of entire Imperial fleets to demonic incursion has occurred frequently enough to warrant specific protocols for dealing with vessels suspected of warp contamination. Ships that return from extended transits with reports of unusual experiences or crew behavior undergo mandatory quarantine procedures that can last for months, during which specialized Inquisition teams conduct thorough investigations to identify and eliminate any traces of chaos corruption. These procedures prove necessary despite their economic cost, as a single corrupted vessel allowed to dock at an Imperial port can spread demonic influence throughout an entire star system. The Astronomicon serves as humanity's primary navigation aid for long-range warp travel, its psychic beacon providing a fixed reference point that allows navigators to plot courses across the galaxy's vast distances. This incredible psychic lighthouse operates through the combined will of the Emperor and the daily sacrifice of approximately 1,000 psychers, their life force consumed to maintain a signal powerful enough to penetrate the warp's chaotic interference across tens of thousands of light years. The beacon's light appears to navigator perception as a brilliant star that remains visible even through the worst warp storms, providing the stable reference point necessary for accurate navigation between distant star systems. The construction and operation of the Astronomicon represents one of the Imperium's most significant technological and logistical achievements, requiring infrastructure and resources on a scale that dwarfs most planetary governments. The beacon's transmission array occupies vast chambers beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, its psychic-focusing crystals and amplification systems incorporating archaeotech components whose replacement would be impossible with current Imperial manufacturing capabilities. The Emperor's personal involvement in maintaining the beacon's operation requires a constant expenditure of psychic energy that contributes to his gradual deterioration while bound to the Golden Throne. The selection and preparation of psychers for Astronomicon duty follow strict protocols designed to maximize the efficiency of their sacrifice while minimizing the risk of chaos corruption during the process. Candidates undergo extensive screening to identify individuals whose psychic abilities fall within specific parameters, as psychers who are too weak provide insufficient energy, while those who are too powerful risk creating instabilities in the beacon's operation. The chosen individuals receive basic training in meditation and psychic-focused techniques, though their ultimate fate remains unchanged regardless of their preparation level. The daily ritual of psyker sacrifice that powers the Astronomicon operates according to procedures that have remained essentially unchanged for 10 millennia, their precise execution critical to maintaining the beacon's consistent output. Groups of approximately 1,000 psychers enter the transmission chambers each day, their life force gradually drained over a period of several hours as their psychic energy is channeled into the beacon's focusing arrays. The process proves invariably fatal, though participants reportedly experience visions of the Emperor's divine presence during their final moments, suggesting that their sacrifice serves a spiritual as well as practical purpose. The logistical requirements for maintaining the Astronomicon's operation place enormous demands on Imperial resources, as the constant need for fresh psychers requires a recruitment and transportation network that spans the entire galaxy. The black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica travel continuously between Imperial worlds, collecting psychers identified by local authorities and transporting them to Terra for evaluation and eventual service. This system processes hundreds of thousands of individuals annually, with only a small percentage proving suitable for roles other than Astronomicon duty. The Astronomicon's range limitations create significant challenges for Imperial expansion and communication, as the beacon's signal becomes increasingly difficult to detect at distances exceeding 50,000 light-years from Terra. This effective range encompasses most of the galaxy's major spiral arms, but leaves vast regions of space beyond reliable navigation assistance, forcing expeditions to these areas to rely on alternative methods for warp travel guidance. The establishment of secondary beacon stations in distant regions has been attempted repeatedly, but the technical and logistical challenges involved have prevented the successful implementation of such projects. Regional variations in the Astronomicon signal strength create additional complications for Imperial navigation, as warp storms and other psychic phenomena can interfere with the beacon's transmission in unpredictable ways. Areas of space affected by major chaos incursions may experience complete signal blackouts that persist for years or decades, effectively isolating entire sectors from the rest of the Imperium until the interference clears. Navigators operating in these regions must rely on alternative reference points, including natural warp phenomena and ancient Xenos navigation aids whose reliability remains questionable. The political implications of humanity's dependence on the Astronomicon extend far beyond simple navigation concerns, as control of the beacon represents ultimate power over Imperial transportation and communication networks. The Adeptus Terra's monopoly on Astronomicon operations ensures that Terra remains the undisputed center of Imperial civilization, while any threat to the beacon's continued operation poses an existential danger to the entire Imperium. This vulnerability has been recognized and exploited by various enemies of humanity, from chaos cults seeking to corrupt the beacon's operators to Xeno civilizations attempting to disrupt Imperial supply lines through targeted attacks on the transmission facilities. The interaction between the astronomican and other psychic phenomena creates complex interference patterns that can affect both the beacon's operation and the broader psychic environment around Terra. The massive psychic energies required to maintain the beacon's output generate secondary effects that influence everything from local weather patterns to the behavior of psykers throughout the Sol system. These effects have intensified over the millennia as the Emperor's physical condition has deteriorated, creating concerns among Imperial authorities about the long-term stability of both the beacon and the broader psychic infrastructure that supports Imperial civilization. The catastrophic failure of the Emperor's Webway project and humanity's continued dependence on warp travel created an unprecedented crisis that extended far beyond navigation and transportation concerns. Every human born with psychic abilities represented both a potential asset and an existential threat to Imperial civilization, their untrained minds serving as gateways through which demonic entities could pour into real space. The Imperium's response to this fundamental vulnerability required the construction of vast bureaucratic and military apparatus dedicated to identifying, collecting, and controlling every psyker within humanity's domain, creating systems of oppression and sacrifice that would define Imperial society for millennia to come. The manifestation of psychic abilities in human populations follows patterns that Imperial scholars have studied extensively but never fully understood. Psychic awakening typically occurs during periods of extreme stress or emotional trauma, when the barriers between an individual's consciousness and the warp become sufficiently weakened to allow direct contact with the Immaterium's chaotic energies. These initial manifestations often prove catastrophic for both the emerging psyker and their immediate surroundings, as untrained minds lack the discipline necessary to control the forces they have inadvertently accessed. The most common form of psychic awakening involves spontaneous telekinetic events triggered by fear, anger, or desperation. A child facing physical abuse might unconsciously lash out with psychic force, sending their attacker flying across a room with enough violence to shatter bones. Workers trapped in industrial accidents have been known to bend metal barriers with their minds while experiencing the terror of impending death. These incidents typically occur without conscious intent, the psyker's subconscious mind reaching into the warp for power, while their rational consciousness remains unaware of what is happening. Telepathic manifestations prove equally dramatic and often more disturbing to witnesses, as the sudden ability to hear others' thoughts can drive newly awakened psykers to madness within hours. The constant barrage of unfiltered mental noise from everyone in their vicinity overwhelms their capacity for rational thought, while the revelation of hidden fears, desires, and secrets destroys their ability to maintain normal social relationships. Many telepathic awakenings result in the psyker's complete psychological breakdown, their minds retreating into catatonic states as they attempt to escape the endless stream of alien thoughts flooding their consciousness. Pyrokinetic abilities manifest through spontaneous combustion events that can consume entire city blocks if left unchecked. The flames generated by psychic fire burn at temperatures that exceed those produced by conventional incendiary devices, while their supernatural nature allows them to spread through materials that should be completely fireproof. These psychic conflagrations often display an apparent intelligence, seeking out specific targets while avoiding others in ways that suggest conscious direction, despite the psyker's lack of training or control. The detection of psychic manifestations relies on a combination of technological monitoring systems and human observation networks that span every level of Imperial society. Psychic resonance detectors installed in major population centers can identify the distinctive energy signatures produced by uncontrolled psychic events. They're sensitive arrays capable of distinguishing between genuine psychic phenomena and the various forms of electromagnetic interference that plague advanced technological civilizations. These devices require constant calibration and maintenance by specially trained technicians, as their delicate components can be disrupted by everything from solar flares to the psychic background noise generated by large crowds. Local authorities throughout the Imperium maintain detailed protocols for responding to suspected psychic manifestations, their procedures designed to contain the immediate threat while preserving evidence for subsequent investigation by specialized Imperial agencies. Planetary defense forces receive training in recognizing the signs of psychic activity, from the distinctive burn patterns left by psychic fire to the psychological symptoms displayed by telepathic contact victims. Civil authorities learn to identify the environmental anomalies that often accompany major psychic events, including localized gravitational distortions, temporal fluctuations, and the spontaneous failure of electronic equipment. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica serves as the primary Imperial organization responsible for psyker identification, collection, and training. Its vast bureaucracy, encompassing everything from local recruitment offices to the massive training facilities that process thousands of individuals annually. This organization operates with authority that supersedes most planetary governments, its agents empowered to requisition resources and personnel as needed to fulfill their mission of controlling humanity's psychic population. The Telepathica's influence extends into every aspect of Imperial society, from the educational systems that screen children for psychic potential to the military units that provide security for psyker transportation and containment operations. The black ships that serve as the Telepathica's primary transportation assets represent some of the most feared vessels in the Imperial fleet, their arrival at any world signaling the beginning of systematic psyker collection operations that can last for months. These massive vessels incorporate specialized containment systems designed to hold hundreds of psykers safely during extended voyages, their holds equipped with psychic dampening fields and isolation chambers that prevent both escape attempts and accidental psychic phenomena. The ship's crews consist entirely of individuals who have been tested and proven resistant to psychic influence, their training emphasizing the importance of maintaining emotional detachment from their cargo's inevitable fate. The collection process itself operates according to strict protocols designed to minimize both the risk of psychic incidents and the potential for civil unrest among planetary populations. Local authorities receive advance notice of impending collection operations, allowing them to prepare detention facilities and coordinate with Telepathica agents to identify priority targets. The actual roundup typically occurs over a period of several days, with teams of agents systematically visiting locations where psykers have been identified or are suspected to be hiding. Resistance to psyker collection efforts proves futile in most cases, as the Telepathica's agents possess both the legal authority and the practical means to overcome any opposition they encounter. Families attempting to hide psychic children face severe penalties that can include execution or transportation to penal colonies, while planetary governments that interfere with collection operations risk direct intervention by Imperial military forces. The message conveyed by these harsh measures remains clear. Cooperation with psyker collection serves the greater good of humanity, while resistance threatens the survival of entire worlds. The transportation of collected psykers to Terra for processing requires specialized procedures that account for both the physical and psychological stresses of extended warp travel. The Black Ship's containment systems include not just physical restraints, but also psychic dampening fields that suppress the prisoner's abilities while preventing them from making contact with warp entities during transit. These suppression systems prove necessary despite their debilitating effects on the psykers themselves, as even minor psychic incidents during warp travel can compromise a vessel's Geller fields and doom everyone aboard. The conditions aboard Black Ships during these voyages reflect the harsh realities of Imperial psyker policy, as the collected individuals are treated more as dangerous cargo than as human beings deserving of basic dignity. Overcrowding in the containment forces psychers to endure weeks or months of confinement in spaces barely large enough for their physical needs, while the constant presence of psychic dampening fields creates a persistent sense of mental numbness that many describe as worse than physical torture. Medical care remains minimal, focused primarily on keeping the prisoners alive rather than maintaining their health or comfort. The psychological impact of collection and transportation proves devastating for most psychers, as they face the sudden destruction of their previous lives combined with the terrifying uncertainty of their ultimate fate. Many experience severe depression or anxiety disorders that persist throughout their subsequent training and service, while others develop dissociative conditions that allow them to mentally separate themselves from the trauma they have experienced. The Telepathica's records indicate that approximately 30% of collected psychers suffer complete psychological breakdowns during transportation, requiring specialized intervention to prevent suicide attempts or violent outbursts. The Scholastica Psychana represents the Imperium's primary institution for psycher training and indoctrination. Its massive facilities on Terra processing thousands of individuals annually through programs designed to transform potentially dangerous psychers into useful servants of the imperial state. The organization operates multiple training complexes scattered across Terra's surface and throughout the Sol system, each specialized for different categories of psycher and different intended roles within imperial society. The largest of these facilities can house tens of thousands of students simultaneously, their dormitories, classrooms, and training areas occupying areas equivalent to entire cities. The initial processing of newly arrived psychers begins with comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations designed to assess both their psychic potential and their suitability for different forms of service. Teams of specialists conduct detailed examinations that can last for weeks, testing everything from basic psychic sensitivity to complex pattern recognition abilities that might indicate aptitude for specific roles. These evaluations also screen for signs of chaos corruption or genetic abnormalities that might disqualify candidates from certain forms of training, as the Imperium cannot afford to invest resources in individuals who pose unacceptable risks. The categorization system used by the Scholastica Psychana divides psychers into multiple classification levels based on their power, stability, and potential applications. Alpha-level psychers possess abilities powerful enough to serve in combat roles or other high-responsibility positions, but they also represent the greatest risk of catastrophic failure if their training proves inadequate. These individuals receive the most intensive instruction and supervision, their programs extending over several years and including advanced techniques for psychic combat, defensive shielding, and controlled power manifestation. Beta-level psychers demonstrate moderate abilities suitable for support roles within imperial organizations, including astropathic communication, divination, and psychic investigation services. Their training focuses on developing specific skills rather than raw power, emphasizing reliability and consistency over dramatic displays of psychic might. These individuals often serve extended apprenticeships with experienced practitioners, learning through direct observation and gradually increasing responsibility rather than formal classroom instruction. Gamma-level and lower classifications encompass psychers whose abilities prove too weak or unstable for specialized roles, though they may still serve useful functions within imperial society. Many of these individuals find employment in minor divination services, helping to identify potential problems or opportunities for local authorities. Others serve as psychic resonance monitors, using their limited abilities to detect the presence of stronger psychers or signs of warp disturbance in their assigned areas. The training regimens employed by the Scholastica Psychana combine theoretical instruction with practical exercises designed to develop both psychic abilities and the mental discipline necessary to control them safely. Students spend countless hours learning to meditate and focus their thoughts, developing the concentration skills that form the foundation of all advanced psychic techniques. These mental exercises prove particularly challenging for individuals who have experienced traumatic psychic awakenings, as they must learn to confront and control the very forces that previously overwhelmed them. Physical conditioning forms another crucial component of psyker training, as the use of psychic abilities places enormous stress on the human body that can prove fatal without proper preparation. Students engage in rigorous exercise programs designed to strengthen their cardiovascular systems and improve their overall endurance, while specialized dietary regimens provide the nutritional support necessary for sustained psychic activity. The combination of mental and physical training creates a holistic approach that addresses all aspects of psyker development and safety. The theological component of Scholastica Psychana training emphasizes the importance of faith and spiritual purity as defenses against chaos corruption. Students receive extensive instruction in imperial doctrine and the worship of the emperor, learning to view their psychic abilities as divine gifts that carry corresponding responsibilities. This religious education includes detailed study of chaos corruption and its symptoms, teaching psychers to recognize the early signs of demonic influence and the proper procedures for reporting suspected incidents to their superiors. The practical application of psychic abilities receives careful attention throughout the training process, with students practicing their skills under controlled conditions that minimize the risk of accidents or unwanted manifestations. Training facilities include specialized chambers equipped with psychic dampening systems and emergency containment protocols, allowing instructors to intervene quickly if students lose control of their abilities. These practice sessions gradually increase in complexity and intensity as students demonstrate improved control and understanding of their powers. The brutal selection process that accompanies Scholastica Psychana training reflects the harsh realities of psychic development and the Imperium's desperate need for reliable psychers. Mortality rates during training exceed 50% for most programs, with students dying from everything from psychic feedback to demonic possession to simple physical exhaustion from the demands placed upon them. The instructors who oversee these programs maintain strict emotional detachment from their students, understanding that excessive concern for individual welfare could compromise the training process and ultimately result in more deaths. The creation of sanctioned psychers represents the successful culmination of the Scholastica Psychana's training programs, producing individuals whose abilities have been honed and disciplined to serve imperial needs while minimizing the risk of catastrophic failure. These graduates undergo final examinations that test not just their psychic abilities, but also their loyalty, stability, and resistance to chaos corruption. The soul-binding ritual that marks their transition from student to sanctioned psyker creates permanent psychic links to the Emperor himself, providing both additional power and a form of spiritual protection against demonic influence. The soul-binding process itself represents one of the most dangerous and traumatic experiences that any human being can endure, as it requires direct psychic contact with the Emperor's consciousness while he remains bound to the Golden Throne. The ritual takes place in specially prepared chambers deep beneath the Imperial Palace, their walls inscribed with protective wards and blessed by centuries of religious ceremony. The psyker candidates who participate in this process face the Emperor's psychic presence directly, an experience that burns away portions of their individual identity while forging the spiritual connections that will define the rest of their existence. The physical effects of soul binding prove immediately apparent, as the process typically destroys the candidate's eyesight while leaving distinctive scarring around the eye sockets that marks them as sanctioned psychers for the remainder of their lives. This blindness proves largely irrelevant to their subsequent function, as soul-bound psychers develop enhanced psychic perception that provides them with awareness of their surroundings that often exceeds normal vision. The psychological effects prove equally dramatic, as the experience of direct contact with the Emperor's consciousness leaves permanent changes in the psycher's personality and thought patterns. The survival rate for soul-binding rituals remains discouragingly low, with approximately 70% of candidates dying during the process itself. Those who survive emerge as fundamentally changed individuals whose previous lives and relationships become largely irrelevant to their new existence as servants of the imperial state. The psychic link established during soul binding provides them with enhanced abilities and resistance to chaos corruption, but it also creates a form of spiritual dependence that makes independent existence virtually impossible. Sanctioned psychers who complete their training and soul binding receive assignments throughout the Imperium based on their abilities, temperament, and the current needs of various imperial organizations. The most powerful and stable individuals often serve with the Imperial Guard as battle psychers, their abilities providing crucial support for military operations against both conventional enemies and supernatural threats. These combat psychers undergo additional training in military tactics and weapons handling, preparing them for the unique challenges of using psychic powers in active warfare situations. Astropathic communication represents another major career path for sanctioned psychers, as their soul binding provides them with the spiritual protection necessary to safely transmit messages across interstellar distances. These individuals serve as the backbone of imperial communication networks, their telepathic abilities allowing them to maintain contact between distant worlds despite the interference created by warp storms and other psychic phenomena. The work proves both mentally demanding and physically exhausting, as astropathic transmission requires the psyker to project their consciousness partially into the warp while maintaining sufficient connection to real space to encode and decode complex messages. The perils of the warp represent the constant danger faced by all psychers who attempt to channel the Immaterium's chaotic energies, regardless of their training level or spiritual protection. These phenomena occur when a psyker's control falters during the use of their abilities, allowing warp entities to exploit the temporary breach in reality's fabric. The specific manifestations of psychic perils vary enormously depending on the circumstances involved, but they invariably result in consequences that extend far beyond the individual psyker who triggered them. Minor psychic phenomena might include temporary reality distortions that cause objects to change color or texture, localized gravitational anomalies that make items float or fall in unexpected directions, or brief temporal fluctuations that cause events to occur out of sequence. While these effects prove disturbing to witnesses, they typically dissipate within minutes and cause no permanent damage to either people or property. However, they serve as warning signs that the psyker's control is weakening and that more serious incidents may follow if proper precautions are not taken. Major psychic phenomena can include the spontaneous manifestation of demonic entities, the opening of temporary warp rifts that allow hostile forces to enter real space, or the complete possession of the psyker by malevolent warp entities. These incidents often result in significant casualties and property damage, while the psychic contamination they create can persist for years after the initial event. Imperial authorities maintain specialized response teams trained to deal with such emergencies, their equipment and procedures designed to contain the immediate threat while minimizing the risk of further psychic incidents. The catastrophic psychic phenomena that result from uncontrolled psyker manifestations represent only the most immediate threat posed by the Immaterium's intrusion into real space. Far more insidious and permanent are the tears in reality itself that occur when the barriers between dimensions become so weakened that they cannot naturally repair themselves. These warp rifts create permanent gateways through which the chaotic energies of the Immaterium pour continuously into the material universe, transforming entire regions of space into hellish landscapes where the laws of physics bend to the will of chaos gods and reality becomes as malleable as wet clay. The formation of stable warp rifts requires specific conditions that combine massive psychic trauma with sustained exposure to Immaterium energies over extended periods. The most common catalyst involves the death of powerful psychers under circumstances that generate enormous amounts of psychic energy, such as the destruction of entire populations during orbital bombardments or the mass execution of captured psychers by enemy forces. The psychic screams of the dying create shock waves that propagate through both real space and the warp simultaneously, their resonance patterns gradually weakening the dimensional barriers until permanent breaches become inevitable. Large-scale military conflicts involving psychic combatants often create the ideal conditions for rift formation, as the concentrated use of warp-based abilities in close proximity generates cumulative stress on local reality. Battlefields where Space Marine librarians duel with Chaos sorcerers frequently develop minor reality distortions that persist long after the fighting has ended, their effects ranging from areas where gravity operates inconsistently to zones where time flows at different rates than the surrounding environment. These anomalous regions serve as warning signs that dimensional stability has been compromised and that more serious breaches may develop without intervention. The presence of powerful demon entities in real space accelerates the rift formation process significantly, as these beings exist as living violations of natural law whose very presence weakens the barriers that separate dimensions. Greater demons who maintain manifestation for extended periods create expanding zones of reality distortion around themselves, their supernatural essence gradually corrupting the fundamental structure of local spacetime. The longer such entities remain active in the material universe, the more likely it becomes that their presence will create permanent gateways that persist even after the demon itself has been banished or destroyed. Ancient battlefields from the Horus Heresy continue to spawn new warp rifts 10 millennia after the conflicts that created them, their soil saturated with the psychic residue of fratricidal warfare between the Emperor's own sons. Locations where Primarchs fought each other in personal combat remain particularly unstable, as the psychic energies generated by these demigod-level beings created distortions that may never fully heal. Imperial survey teams report that certain areas of Istvan III and Istvan V still experience spontaneous demon manifestations, while the ruins of Prospero continue to phase in and out of real space according to patterns that defy prediction. The Eye of Terror stands as the most massive and dangerous warp rift in the galaxy, a wound in reality so vast that it encompasses hundreds of star systems and continues to expand despite 10 millennia of Imperial containment efforts. This colossal breach originated during the fall of the Eldar, when the birth of Slaanesh created a psychic explosion powerful enough to tear a permanent hole between dimensions. The Eye's interior exists in a state of constant flux where the normal laws of physics hold no meaning, creating an environment where chaos forces can exist and operate without the limitations that constrain them in normal space. Within the Eye of Terror, entire worlds have been transformed into demon planets where reality itself serves the whims of the ruinous powers. These corrupted spheres exist as physical manifestations of their ruling chaos god's nature, their landscapes, weather patterns, and even the flow of time shaped by supernatural forces rather than natural processes. The planet of the sorcerers, Tzeentch's primary stronghold within the Eye, appears as a constantly shifting maze of crystalline towers and impossible architectural forms that rearrange themselves according to the architect of fate's ever-changing schemes. The geography of the planet of the sorcerers defies conventional mapping, as its surface features transform continuously in response to the psychic emanations of its inhabitants. Libraries containing forbidden knowledge materialize and vanish according to the needs of those seeking specific information, while laboratories equipped with reality-altering equipment appear wherever Tzeentch's servants require them for their experiments. The planet's population consists primarily of Thousand Suns Chaos Space Marines, whose bodies have been reduced to animated suits of armor containing nothing but dust and malevolent spirits, their condition serving as a constant reminder of the price paid for trafficking with the Changer of Ways. The crystalline structures that dominate the planet of the sorcerers serve multiple functions beyond simple habitation, acting as massive psychic amplifiers that focus and direct the warp energies that permeate the world's atmosphere. These towers resonate with frequencies that exist beyond normal sound, their harmonics creating complex interference patterns that can alter probability, manipulate causality, and even rewrite the fundamental constants that govern local reality. The largest of these structures reaches heights that extend beyond the planet's atmosphere, its apex disappearing into dimensional folds that connect directly to Tzeentch's domain within the warp itself. Nurgle's plague planet represents a completely different approach to demon world creation. Its corruption focused on biological transformation rather than reality manipulation. This festering sphere exists as a massive laboratory where the Lord of Decay experiments with new forms of disease and corruption, its surface covered with gardens of mutated plant life that exist in perfect symbiosis with the countless bacterial and viral organisms that permeate the world's ecosystem. The planet's atmosphere consists of a toxic mixture of gases that would prove instantly fatal to unprotected humans, yet it supports an incredibly diverse ecosystem of corrupted life forms that thrive in conditions that would destroy normal organisms. The plague planet's cities consist of vast organic structures that grow rather than being built, their walls composed of living tissue that continuously regenerates and adapts to changing conditions. These settlements pulse with their own biological rhythms, their streets flowing like arteries, while their buildings breathe like massive lungs. The inhabitants of these cities include not just Nurgle's demon servants, but also mortal followers whose bodies have been so thoroughly corrupted by disease that they no longer qualify as recognizably human, their forms adapted to thrive in the planet's toxic environment. The manufacturing facilities that produce Nurgle's plagues operate according to principles that combine advanced biotechnology with supernatural corruption, creating production lines where diseases are cultivated like crops and refined through processes that violate every principle of medical science. These facilities process raw biological material harvested from across the galaxy, their workers using techniques that blend scientific methodology with demonic inspiration to create new forms of pestilence tailored for specific targets. The most advanced laboratories on the plague planet can produce diseases that target particular genetic markers, allowing Nurgle's forces to create plagues that affect only specific species or even individual bloodlines. Khorne's domain within the Eye of Terror manifests as an endless battlefield where the concept of eternal war has been given physical form. This demon world exists in a state of perpetual conflict, its surface scarred by weapon impacts that range from primitive blade strikes to the craters left by orbital bombardments. The planet's geography consists entirely of fortifications, battlefields, and the ruins left by previous conflicts, creating a landscape that serves as both monument to and continuation of the Blood God's eternal war. The brass citadel that serves as Khorne's primary stronghold on this world rises from the center of the largest battlefield, its walls constructed from the weapons and armor of every warrior who has ever fallen in the Blood God's service. The fortress's architecture follows no aesthetic principles beyond the practical requirements of warfare, its design focused entirely on creating the most efficient possible environment for training and equipping Khorne's demon legions. The Citadel's foundries work continuously to produce weapons and armor for the Blood God's servants, their furnaces fueled by the rage and hatred of countless warriors, while their anvils ring with the sound of supernatural metalworking. The training grounds that surround the brass citadel extend across entire continents, their surfaces marked by the impact craters and bloodstains left by millions of years of continuous combat practice. These facilities serve as both preparation areas for demon forces, deploying to real space conflicts, and testing grounds for new weapons and tactics developed by Khorne's most innovative servants. The constant sound of clashing weapons and roaring warriors creates a symphony of violence that can be heard across the entire planet, its rhythm serving as a heartbeat that drives the world's inhabitants to ever greater displays of martial prowess. Slaanish's demon worlds within the Eye of Terror pursue perfection through excess, their landscapes designed to provide the ultimate sensory experiences that the Prince of Pleasure's followers crave. These planets exist as vast pleasure palaces where every conceivable desire can be fulfilled, their environments carefully crafted to stimulate all five senses simultaneously, while providing experiences that transcend normal human perception. The architecture of these worlds combines elements from every civilization that has ever existed, creating impossible structures that blend beauty and horror in ways that can drive observers to madness through their sheer aesthetic intensity. The Palace of Pleasure that dominates Slaanesh's primary demon world stretches across multiple continents. Its chambers and corridors, designed to provide different categories of sensory experience for the Prince of Pleasure's diverse following. Concert halls where demon orchestras perform music of impossible complexity adjoin galleries filled with artworks that can induce religious ecstasy in viewers, while gardens of living crystal grow flowers that sing in harmonious choirs. The palace's inhabitants include not just demons, but also mortal followers who have been so thoroughly corrupted by their pursuit of sensation that they have become living artworks themselves, their bodies modified through a combination of surgery, mutation, and supernatural transformation to achieve aesthetic ideals that exist beyond normal human comprehension. The manufacturing centers on Slaanesh's demon worlds produce items of such exquisite craftsmanship that they can serve as weapons against those who view them, their beauty so intense that it overwhelms the observer's capacity for rational thought. These facilities employ techniques that combine master craftsmanship with demonic inspiration, creating objects that exist as physical manifestations of perfection itself. The workers in these centers pursue their craft with an obsession that borders on madness, their dedication to achieving flawless results driving them to spend decades or centuries perfecting individual pieces. Beyond the demon worlds controlled by the major chaos gods, the Eye of Terror contains numerous smaller planets that have been claimed by lesser demon princes or independent chaos warbands. These worlds reflect the specific obsessions and capabilities of their rulers, creating a diverse array of corrupted environments that serve various purposes within the greater chaos war machine. Some function as recruiting grounds where mortal populations are gradually corrupted and transformed into chaos cultists, while others serve as manufacturing centers that produce the weapons and equipment needed by chaos forces operating in real space. The Maelstrom represents another major warp storm that rivals the Eye of Terror in both size and danger, though its internal structure differs significantly from its more famous counterpart. This massive reality distortion appears as a spiraling vortex of psychic energy that draws in both matter and souls from the surrounding region, its gravitational effects extending across multiple star systems. The Maelstrom's interior contains numerous demon worlds and corrupted space hulks that drift through its chaotic currents, their positions constantly shifting according to patterns that reflect the storm's supernatural nature. The Red Corsairs and other Chaos Renegade forces have established strongholds within the Maelstrom's depths, using the storm's reality-distorting effects as both protection and weapon against Imperial forces that attempt to penetrate their domain. These bases exist in a state of constant flux, their locations and configurations changing as the Maelstrom's currents carry them through different regions of the storm. The inhabitants of these facilities must constantly adapt to changing environmental conditions that can range from normal space to areas where time flows backward or gravity operates in multiple directions simultaneously. Smaller warp rifts scattered throughout Imperial space pose ongoing threats that require constant vigilance and immediate response from specialized Imperial forces. These minor breaches typically affect areas ranging from individual buildings to entire city districts, their effects localized but potentially catastrophic if left unchecked. The Ordo Malleus maintains detailed records of known rift locations throughout Imperial space, their archives containing detailed analyses of each breach's characteristics and the specific threats it poses to surrounding populations. The Cadian Gate, that crucial strategic chokepoint that controlled access between the Eye of Terror and the wider galaxy, represented humanity's primary defense against large-scale chaos incursions for 10 millennia before its destruction during the 13th Black Crusade. This heavily fortified region of space contained multiple fortress worlds whose populations dedicated their entire existence to monitoring and containing the warp rifts that periodically opened in their vicinity. The Cadian shock troops who garrisoned these worlds developed specialized tactics and equipment for fighting demon incursions, their expertise making them among the most effective anti-chaos forces in the Imperial military. The destruction of Cadia during Abaddon's final assault created a massive expansion of the Eye of Terror that allowed Chaos forces unprecedented access to Imperial space. The psychic shock wave generated by the planet's destruction propagated across the galaxy, creating new warp rifts and destabilizing existing ones in ways that continue to affect Imperial operations. The Great Rift that now bisects the galaxy represents the ultimate manifestation of this catastrophe, its effects creating a permanent division between the Imperium's northern and southern regions. Imperial efforts to seal warp rifts employ a combination of technological solutions, psychic intervention, and extreme military measures that reflect both the diversity of threats posed by these breaches and the limited resources available for dealing with them. The Sisters of Silence, those rare individuals born with the pariah gene that makes them psychic nulls, represent one of the Imperium's most effective tools for containing minor rift formations. Their presence creates zones of psychic silence that can stabilize weakened dimensional barriers while preventing demon manifestation in affected areas. The deployment of Sisters of Silence to rift containment operations requires careful coordination with other Imperial forces, as their null aura affects all psychic phenomena within their vicinity, including beneficial abilities used by Imperial psychers and Space Marine librarians. These operations typically involve establishing perimeters around affected areas, while the Sisters work to reinforce the damaged dimensional barriers through their natural anti-psychic properties. The process can take weeks or months depending on the rift's size and stability, during which time the affected region must be completely evacuated and sealed off from civilian access. Psychic wards represent another crucial tool in the Imperial arsenal for rift containment. They're protective barriers created through a combination of blessed materials, sacred geometry, and focused psychic energy channeled by trained specialists. These installations require constant maintenance by skilled tech priests and sanctioned psychers, their effectiveness dependent on precise calibration that must be adjusted continuously as local psychic conditions change. The most sophisticated ward networks can contain moderate-sized rifts indefinitely, though they remain vulnerable to sabotage by chaos cultists or direct assault by demon forces. The construction of permanent ward installations around major rift sites requires enormous investments of both resources and personnel, as these facilities must be designed to operate independently for extended periods while maintaining their protective functions. The ward generators themselves incorporate archaeotech components, whose replacement becomes increasingly difficult as the Imperium's technological capabilities continue to decline, making the loss of existing installations particularly catastrophic for Imperial defensive capabilities. Grey Knights represent the ultimate Imperial response to major demon incursions and large-scale rift formations, their specialized training and equipment making them uniquely qualified to operate in environments where reality itself has become unstable. These elite Space Marines undergo extensive conditioning that renders them immune to most forms of chaos corruption, while providing them with the psychic abilities necessary to combat demon entities on equal terms. Their deployment to rift containment operations typically signals that conventional Imperial forces have proven inadequate to deal with the threat. The Grey Knights' operations in rift-affected areas follow strict protocols designed to minimize their exposure to corrupting influences while maximizing their effectiveness against demon targets. Their power armor incorporates specialized systems that provide protection against both physical and psychic attacks, while their weapons include force weapons that can channel psychic energy to disrupt demon manifestations. The chapter's extensive experience with anti-demon warfare has produced tactical doctrines that address the unique challenges posed by combat in reality-distorted environments. Exterminatus protocols represent the Imperial response of last resort when warp rifts have grown beyond the capacity of conventional containment methods. These extreme measures involve the complete destruction of affected planets through orbital bombardment, virus bombing, or other weapons of mass destruction that can eliminate all life on a world's surface. The decision to authorize exterminatus operations requires approval from the highest levels of Imperial authority, as the loss of entire worlds represents a significant strategic setback that must be balanced against the threat posed by uncontrolled demon expansion. The implementation of exterminatus against rift-affected worlds follows specific procedures designed to ensure complete destruction of all potential chaos contamination. The bombardment patterns used in these operations target not just population centers and military installations, but also any geographical features that might harbor residual psychic corruption. The weapons employed in exterminatus operations include cyclonic torpedoes that can crack a planet's crust, atmospheric incinerators that burn away entire biospheres, and virus bombs that consume all organic matter on a world's surface. The psychological impact of exterminatus operations on Imperial forces and civilian populations creates ongoing challenges for Imperial authorities, as the knowledge that entire worlds can be sacrificed to contain chaos incursions affects morale and loyalty throughout affected regions. Imperial propaganda efforts work continuously to frame these extreme measures as necessary sacrifices for the greater good of humanity, while strict censorship prevents detailed information about exterminatus operations from reaching civilian populations. The Inquisition maintains extensive surveillance networks to identify and eliminate individuals whose knowledge of these operations might compromise Imperial security or provide propaganda opportunities for chaos cults. The destruction of entire worlds and the implementation of exterminatus protocols represent only the most extreme manifestations of humanity's struggle against warp corruption. Yet these desperate measures pale in comparison to the elegant solutions developed by the Eldar during their civilization's golden age. Long before humanity had even discovered fire, the ancient Eldar Empire had recognized the fundamental dangers inherent in direct warp travel and had embarked upon the construction of an alternative transportation network that would allow them to traverse the galaxy without exposing themselves to the Immaterium's chaotic energies. The webway, that vast network of psychically neutral tunnels that spans the galaxy, represents perhaps the greatest engineering achievement in galactic history, its construction requiring technologies and techniques that current Imperial science can barely comprehend. The Eldar's mastery of webway construction during their empire's height stemmed from their unique relationship with psychic energy and their deep understanding of the fundamental forces that govern both real space and the Immaterium. Unlike humanity's crude attempts to harness warp power through brute force and technological augmentation, the Eldar approached psychic phenomena as artists and craftsmen, their techniques emphasizing precision, elegance, and harmony with natural psychic currents. This philosophical approach allowed them to develop construction methods that worked with the warp's energies rather than against them, creating stable passages that could maintain their integrity for millions of years without requiring constant maintenance or reinforcement. The basic structure of webway tunnels consists of psychically reinforced passages that exist partially within the Immaterium while remaining isolated from its chaotic currents through sophisticated barrier systems. These barriers operate according to principles that combine advanced materials science with psychic manipulation techniques, creating boundaries that allow controlled access to warp energies while preventing the intrusion of hostile entities or corrupting influences. The tunnel walls themselves are constructed from wraithbone, a psychically responsive material that can be shaped through focused mental effort and maintains its structural integrity through continuous psychic resonance with its creators. The construction process for major webway arteries required the coordinated efforts of thousands of Eldar artisans working over periods that could span centuries, their activities guided by farseers whose prophetic abilities allowed them to perceive the optimal configurations for tunnel networks that would serve their civilization's needs for millennia to come. These master craftsmen developed specialized techniques for manipulating wraithbone on a massive scale, their psychic abilities allowing them to shape materials with precision that exceeded any mechanical tool, while imbuing the finished structures with protective enchantments that would defend against both physical and supernatural threats. The Eldar Empire's approach to webway expansion followed careful planning that took into account not just immediate transportation needs, but also the long-term strategic implications of connecting different regions of space through rapid transit networks. Major hub worlds served as junction points where multiple tunnel systems converged, their locations chosen to provide optimal access to resource-rich systems while maintaining defensive advantages against potential enemies. These hub installations incorporated massive portal complexes that could accommodate everything from individual travelers to entire fleets, their capacity limited only by the psychic energy available to power the transportation systems. The integration of webway access points with Eldar cities and installations required architectural planning that blended transportation infrastructure with residential and commercial development in ways that created seamless integration between local and interstellar travel systems. Eldar urban planners designed their cities around webway terminals, creating transportation networks that allowed citizens to travel from their homes to destinations on distant worlds with the same ease that modern humans might travel between different districts of a single city. This level of integration transformed Eldar society by eliminating the isolation that typically affects interstellar civilizations, allowing for cultural and economic exchange on a scale that had never before been achieved. The security systems that protected webway tunnels from unauthorized access incorporated multiple layers of defense that combined physical barriers with psychic screening techniques and automated guardian systems. Access portals required specific psychic signatures to activate, their recognition systems calibrated to identify authorized users while rejecting attempts at entry by hostile forces. These security measures proved particularly important given the webway's strategic value, as control of major tunnel networks could provide enormous military advantages to any force capable of seizing and holding key junction points. The Eldar's mastery of webway construction extended beyond simple transportation tunnels to encompass entire pocket dimensions that existed within the network structure, creating spaces that could serve as hidden bases, storage facilities, or emergency shelters during times of crisis. These dimensional annexes operated according to spatial principles that allowed them to contain volumes far larger than their apparent size, their interiors configured to serve specific purposes while remaining accessible only through carefully concealed entrance points. The most sophisticated of these installations included self-contained ecosystems that could support Eldar populations for extended periods, complete with atmospheric processors, food production facilities, and defensive systems. The fall of the Eldar and the birth of Slaanesh created catastrophic damage to the webway network that persists to the present day, as the psychic shockwave generated by the Prince of Pleasure's emergence tore through tunnel systems throughout the galaxy. Entire sections of the network collapsed or became corrupted by chaos influence, their wraithbone structures twisted into configurations that served the new god's purposes rather than their original transportation function. The surviving Eldar found themselves cut off from vast portions of their ancient highway system, forced to rely on fragmentary networks that connected only small portions of their former empire. The craft worlds that survived the fall represented the Eldar's most successful adaptation to their civilization's collapse, these massive vessels serving as both transportation and habitation for the scattered remnants of their species. Each craftworld incorporated its own webway access points that allowed connection to the surviving tunnel networks, though these portals required careful maintenance and constant vigilance to prevent chaos corruption from spreading into the vessel's interior spaces. The craftworld Eldar developed specialized techniques for monitoring and maintaining their webway connections, their bonesingers working continuously to repair damage and reinforce weakened sections of the tunnel system. The use of the webway for craftworld operations extends far beyond simple transportation, as these vessels rely on the tunnel network for everything from resource gathering to military coordination between different craftworld fleets. Eldar expeditionary forces can deploy through webway portals to conduct raids against enemy positions before withdrawing through the same routes, their mobility allowing them to strike at targets that would be impossible to reach through conventional space travel. This tactical flexibility has allowed the scattered craftworld fleets to maintain military effectiveness despite their relatively small numbers and limited resources. The craftworld's trading relationships with each other depend heavily on webway connections that allow for the exchange of resources, information, and personnel between vessels that might be separated by thousands of light years in real space. These commercial networks operate according to ancient protocols that govern everything from cargo manifests to payment systems, their procedures refined over millennia of interstellar commerce. The most valuable trade goods include wraithbone and other psychically active materials that cannot be safely transported through normal space, their properties making them essential for craftworld maintenance and expansion projects. Craftworld military doctrine incorporates webway mobility as a fundamental element of strategic planning, with Eldar commanders designing their campaigns around the assumption that their forces can appear anywhere within the tunnel network's reach without warning. This capability allows relatively small Eldar armies to achieve strategic objectives that would require much larger forces if they were limited to conventional transportation methods. The element of surprise provided by webway deployment often proves decisive in conflicts with enemies who lack similar mobility, as Imperial and other forces find themselves unable to predict or counter Eldar movements. The maintenance of webway connections requires constant attention from specialized craftworld personnel who combine the roles of engineer, psychic practitioner, and warrior in their efforts to keep the tunnel systems operational. These individuals must regularly enter the webway itself to conduct inspections and repairs, their work taking them into environments where reality operates according to principles that can prove fatal to the unprepared. The dangers they face include not just structural hazards from damaged tunnel sections, but also the possibility of encountering chaos entities that have infiltrated compromised areas of the network. The Harlequins occupy a unique position within post-fall Eldar society, their role as guardians of the Black Library and servants of Segorach, granting them access to webway sections that remain forbidden to other Eldar factions. These enigmatic performers possess knowledge of tunnel routes and access codes that have been lost to the craftworld Eldar, their understanding of the network's deeper mysteries allowing them to traverse passages that would prove impassable or deadly to others. The Harlequins' mastery of webway navigation stems from their patron god's nature as a trickster deity whose domain includes hidden paths and secret knowledge. The Black Library itself exists within a heavily protected section of the webway, its location concealed through a combination of physical camouflage and psychic misdirection that makes it virtually impossible to find without proper guidance. This vast repository of forbidden knowledge contains information about chaos, the warp, and other dangerous subjects that could prove catastrophic if it fell into the wrong hands. The Harlequins who guard this installation have developed specialized techniques for navigating the reality-distorted passages that surround it, their training including methods for resisting the corrupting influence of the knowledge they protect. The Harlequin troops that travel throughout the webway serve multiple functions beyond their obvious role as entertainers, their performances carrying encoded messages and warnings that help coordinate resistance efforts against chaos incursions. These traveling companies use their access to restricted webway routes to gather intelligence about threats throughout the galaxy, their reports providing early warning systems that allow other Eldar factions to prepare for impending dangers. The information networks maintained by the Harlequins operate according to protocols that predate the fall, their communication methods refined through millennia of clandestine operations. The solitaires who serve among the Harlequins represent individuals who have accepted the ultimate sacrifice in service to their people, their souls already claimed by Slaanesh, but their bodies and minds dedicated to fighting against the Prince of Pleasure's influence. These warriors possess abilities that allow them to traverse the most dangerous sections of the webway, including areas that have been partially corrupted by chaos influence. Their unique status grants them immunity to certain forms of psychic attack, while allowing them to serve as advanced scouts in operations that would prove fatal to normal Eldar. The Great Harlequin, who leads each troop, possesses knowledge of webway routes and access protocols that extends far beyond that of ordinary performers, their understanding encompassing not just current tunnel configurations, but also historical information about sections that have been lost or abandoned. These leaders serve as living libraries of navigational knowledge, their memories containing detailed maps of webway networks that span the entire galaxy. The training required to become a Great Harlequin includes not just performance skills and combat techniques, but also extensive study of webway lore and navigation principles. The Drukhari of Camorra represent the dark mirror of their craftworld cousins, their mastery of webway technology focused on predation and exploitation rather than preservation and protection. The Dark City itself exists within a massive pocket dimension connected to the webway network, its twisted spires and torture chambers fed by the suffering of countless victims captured during raids throughout real space. The Drukhari's relationship with the webway operates as a parasitic symbiosis, their activities gradually corrupting and destabilizing tunnel sections while providing them with the mobility necessary for their predatory lifestyle. Camorra's construction within the webway allows the Dark City to exist partially outside normal space-time, its internal geography following principles that bear little resemblance to conventional architecture. Districts and subrealms within the city can be separated by vast distances in subjective space, while remaining adjacent in terms of actual travel time, their connections maintained through portal networks that operate according to the whims of the city's rulers. This spatial flexibility allows Camorra to accommodate a population that would be impossible to house within a conventional urban environment, while also providing defensive advantages against potential invaders. The Dark City's portal network extends throughout the galaxy through hidden access points that allow Drukhari raiding parties to strike at targets without warning before withdrawing to the safety of their extra-dimensional stronghold. These portals remain concealed through a combination of advanced technology and careful site selection, their locations chosen to provide access to population centers while avoiding areas with heavy Imperial or other military presence. The maintenance of this portal network requires constant expansion and modification as new raiding opportunities present themselves and old routes become compromised by enemy action. Drukhari raiding doctrine depends entirely on their ability to appear without warning through webway portals, conduct lightning-fast attacks against unprepared targets, and withdraw before effective resistance can be organized. These operations typically focus on capturing prisoners rather than territorial conquest, as the Dark City's economy depends on a constant supply of slaves and torture victims to fuel both its entertainment industry and its supernatural ecosystem. The speed and unpredictability of Drukhari raids make them virtually impossible to defend against through conventional military means, as their targets rarely receive any advance warning of impending attacks. The cabals that dominate Drukhari society compete constantly for control of the most profitable raiding routes and portal access points, their conflicts creating a complex web of alliances and betrayals that shapes the Dark City's political landscape. The most powerful cabals maintain private portal networks that provide exclusive access to particularly lucrative raiding grounds, while lesser organizations must rely on shared facilities that offer less security and flexibility. This competition for webway access drives much of the violence and intrigue that characterizes Drukhari society, as control of transportation infrastructure translates directly into military and economic power. The homunculi covens that serve Camorra's flesh crafting industry have developed specialized techniques for using webway portals to transport their victims and experimental subjects, their methods including procedures for keeping prisoners alive during extended transit periods. These dark surgeons maintain their own portal facilities that connect directly to their laboratories and torture chambers, allowing them to acquire fresh subjects from throughout the galaxy without the delays that would be imposed by conventional transportation methods. The most skilled homunculi can even use webway portals as surgical tools, opening dimensional rifts that allow them to perform operations on victims located in distant star systems. The witch cults that provide entertainment for Drukhari society use webway access to stage elaborate gladiatorial contests and blood sports in exotic locations throughout the galaxy. Their events taking place on worlds whose inhabitants remain unaware of the supernatural spectacles occurring in their vicinity. These performances often incorporate captured enemies as unwilling participants, their suffering and death serving as entertainment for Drukhari audiences, while also providing the psychic sustenance that the Dark City's inhabitants require for survival. The most prestigious witch cult events feature combat scenarios that span multiple worlds connected through temporary portal networks. The Drukhari's parasitic relationship with the webway extends beyond simple transportation to encompass their fundamental survival strategy, as their activities within the tunnel network gradually corrupt and destabilize the ancient Eldar infrastructure. The negative psychic energy generated by their torture and murder of captives seeps into the wraithbone structures that form the webway's foundation, creating areas of instability that can eventually lead to tunnel collapse or chaos corruption. This ongoing damage represents a form of slow-motion suicide for the Drukhari species, as their survival depends on maintaining access to the very network that their activities are gradually destroying. The relationship between the different Eldar factions and their shared webway heritage creates complex political dynamics that influence everything from military cooperation to trade relationships. The Craftworld Eldar view the Drukhari's corruption of the tunnel network as a form of species-wide vandalism that threatens the long-term survival of all Eldar, while the Dark City's inhabitants regard their cousins' preservation efforts as naive attempts to maintain a dying infrastructure. These philosophical differences occasionally erupt into open conflict when Drukhari activities threaten webway sections that the Craftworlds consider essential for their survival. The Harlequins serve as neutral arbiters in disputes between different Eldar factions over webway access and usage rights, their role as servants of Segorach granting them authority that transcends normal political boundaries. These interventions typically involve complex negotiations that balance the immediate needs of different factions against the long-term preservation of the tunnel network, their resolutions often requiring compromises that satisfy no one completely, but prevent open warfare between Eldar groups. The Harlequins' unique position allows them to maintain access to webway sections controlled by both Craftworlds and Drukhari, though this neutrality requires constant diplomatic effort to maintain. The ongoing deterioration of the webway network represents one of the greatest long-term threats facing the Eldar species, as the loss of additional tunnel sections could isolate Craftworld fleets and cut off the Dark City from its raiding grounds. The technical challenges involved in repairing major webway damage exceed the capabilities of current Eldar civilization, as the construction techniques used during their empire's height required resources and knowledge that have been lost since the fall. This decline creates a spiral of diminishing returns, where the Eldar's reduced capabilities make them less able to maintain their infrastructure, which in turn further reduces their strategic options and survival prospects. The deteriorating webway network that had sustained Eldar civilization for millennia represented merely one symptom of the Immaterium's increasing instability as the 41st millennium drew toward its catastrophic climax. Throughout the galaxy, warp storms grew larger and more persistent. Demon incursions became commonplace events rather than rare catastrophes, and the very fabric of reality seemed to strain under the accumulated weight of 40,000 years of warfare, suffering, and psychic corruption. The signs of impending disaster manifested across every sector of Imperial space, from the increasing frequency of navigator mutations to the spontaneous manifestation of psychic phenomena among previously stable populations. The 13th Black Crusade launched by Abaddon, the Despoiler, represented the culmination of 10 millennia of preparation and the ultimate test of humanity's ability to withstand the forces of chaos. Unlike his previous attempts to break out of the Eye of Terror, this campaign possessed a focus and coordination that reflected both the Warmaster's accumulated experience and the growing desperation of the Chaos Gods themselves. The forces assembled for this assault dwarfed any previous Chaos incursion, combining Space Marine trader legions with demon armies, renegade Imperial Guard regiments, and Xeno's allies united only by their hatred of the Imperium. The Cadian Gate, that crucial chokepoint which had contained chaos expansion for 10,000 years, faced assault from multiple directions simultaneously as Abaddon's forces emerged from the Eye of Terror in waves that seemed endless. The fortress worlds that guarded this strategic passage found themselves overwhelmed by attacks that combined conventional military tactics with supernatural warfare on a scale never before witnessed. Demon engines materialized directly within Imperial fortifications through localized warp rifts, while Chaos sorcerers unleashed psychic storms that turned entire regiments of defenders into gibbering madmen or worse. Cadia itself, the linchpin of Imperial defenses, and the world whose population had spent 10 millennia preparing for this moment, endured bombardment that exceeded anything in recorded military history. The planet's surface became a hellscape of overlapping craters, where Imperial defenders fought from bunkers carved into bedrock, while Chaos forces poured from landing sites that multiplied faster than they could be contained. The Cadian shock troops, those legendary soldiers whose discipline and training had become synonymous with Imperial military excellence, found themselves facing enemies that violated every principle of conventional warfare. The appearance of the Blackstone fortresses under Abaddon's command transformed the strategic situation from desperate to hopeless, as these ancient weapons platforms possessed firepower capable of cracking planets and defenses that could withstand direct assault by entire Imperial fleets. These colossal structures, originally constructed during the War in Heaven as weapons against the Khatan, had been corrupted and modified by 10 millennia of Chaos influence, until they served as both fortress and weapon in the Warmaster's arsenal. Their deployment against Cadia's orbital defenses created breaches in the planet's protection grid that allowed Chaos forces unlimited access to the surface. The final assault on Cadia combined orbital bombardment with ground invasion and psychic warfare in a coordinated attack that pushed the planet's defenders beyond their breaking point. Abaddon's personal involvement in the surface fighting brought demon princes and greater demons into direct combat with Imperial champions, their battles creating localized reality distortions that spread chaos through both armies. The Warmaster's possession of Drachnian, that demon blade which had once threatened the Emperor himself, allowed him to cut through Imperial defenses, both physical and spiritual, with ease that demoralized even the most stalwart defenders. The destruction of Cadia occurred not through conventional military conquest, but through the planet's deliberate sacrifice by its own defenders, who triggered the detonation of ancient pylons buried beneath the world's surface rather than allow it to fall intact into Chaos hands. The psychic explosion generated by these devices created a shockwave that propagated through both real space and the warp simultaneously, its effects rippling outward from the Cadian system at speeds that exceeded light itself. The death screams of Cadia's population, transmitted through the Immaterium by the psychic resonance of their final moments, created disturbances that were felt by psychers throughout the galaxy. The immediate aftermath of Cadia's destruction saw the Eye of Terror expand beyond its previous boundaries for the first time since the fall of the Eldar, its chaotic energies pouring into real space through the dimensional wound left by the planet's sacrifice. The Cadian Gate, that narrow passage which had channeled and contained chaos expansion for 10 millennia, ceased to exist as a meaningful strategic concept as warp storms erupted throughout the region. Imperial fleets that had maintained blockade positions around the Eye found themselves trapped within expanding reality distortions, their vessels consumed by demonic entities or transformed into chaos-corrupted hulks that would plague Imperial shipping for decades to come. The Great Rift began its formation as the psychic shockwave from Cadia's destruction interacted with existing warp storms and dimensional instabilities throughout the galaxy. This massive tear in reality's fabric started as a relatively narrow band of distorted space stretching from the Eye of Terror toward the galactic core, but its expansion accelerated as it encountered and absorbed other psychic phenomena along its path. Ancient battlefields where the psychic residue of long-forgotten conflicts still lingered became focal points for the rift's growth, their accumulated trauma providing additional energy for the dimensional breach. The rift's expansion followed patterns that seemed almost intelligent in their targeting of strategically significant locations, as if the chaos gods themselves were guiding its growth to maximize damage to Imperial infrastructure. Major warp routes that had carried Imperial commerce for millennia found themselves bisected by the expanding tier, while Forge worlds and Hive worlds that had never experienced significant warp phenomena suddenly found themselves on the rift's edge. The seemingly random nature of the rift's path concealed a deeper logic that reflected the accumulated psychic geography of galactic civilization, as the tier followed lines of psychic stress that had been building for thousands of years. The Astronomican's light, that great beacon which had guided Imperial navigation for 10 millennia, found its signal disrupted and scattered by the Great Rift's interference patterns. Regions of space that had enjoyed reliable communication with Terra discovered that astropathic messages could no longer penetrate the psychic static generated by the dimensional tier, while navigator houses reported increasing difficulty in perceiving the Astronomican's guidance through the warp storms that accompanied the rift's expansion. The practical effect of this disruption was to divide the galaxy into two distinct regions with severely limited communication between them. The northern half of the galaxy, containing Terra and the majority of the Imperium's most important Forge worlds and administrative centers, retained relatively stable connection to the Astronomican and continued to function according to established Imperial protocols. However, even these privileged regions experienced increased demon activity and warp storm frequency as the Great Rift's influence spread through dimensional resonance effects that operated according to principles beyond current Imperial understanding. Worlds that had never experienced significant chaos incursions found themselves facing demon invasions that materialized without warning, while psyker populations throughout the northern regions reported dramatic increases in both their abilities and their vulnerability to warp phenomena. The southern regions of the galaxy, cut off from Terra's light and administrative oversight, became known as the Dark Imperium or Imperium Nihilus, a realm where Imperial worlds struggled to maintain civilization without the guidance and support that had sustained them for millennia. The loss of reliable astropathic communication meant that planetary governors could no longer coordinate their responses to threats or request assistance from neighboring systems, while the disruption of established trade routes created economic chaos that led to famine and civil unrest on countless worlds. The absence of the Astronomican's guidance forced local navigator houses to develop alternative navigation methods that proved far less reliable than traditional techniques. Demon activity within Imperium Nihilus increased exponentially as the weakened barriers between dimensions allowed warp entities unprecedented access to real space. Worlds that had maintained stable populations for thousands of years found themselves facing demon princes who established permanent strongholds in their major cities, while lesser demons roamed the countryside in packs that hunted human settlements for sport. The Imperial Guard regiments stationed throughout the region discovered that conventional military tactics proved inadequate against enemies that could phase through solid matter, regenerate from apparently fatal wounds, and corrupt loyal soldiers through proximity alone. The chaos cults that had operated in secret throughout Imperial space for millennia seized upon the confusion and isolation created by the Great Rift to launch coordinated uprisings that overwhelmed local authorities. These insurrections combined conventional rebellion with supernatural warfare, as cult leaders who had spent decades gathering followers revealed their true allegiances and summoned demon allies to support their cause. The simultaneous nature of these revolts suggested coordination that extended beyond normal communication methods, indicating that the chaos gods themselves were directing their mortal servants' activities through psychic channels that remained unaffected by the rift's interference. The Space Marine chapters stationed throughout Imperium Nihilus found themselves isolated from their parent organizations and forced to operate independently in ways that tested both their tactical flexibility and their spiritual resilience. These elite warriors discovered that their traditional methods of combating chaos forces required significant adaptation to address the increased demon activity and reality distortion effects that accompanied the Great Rift's presence. Many chapters were forced to abandon their fortress monasteries and adopt mobile warfare tactics that allowed them to respond rapidly to threats throughout their assigned sectors. The Adeptus Mechanicus Forge worlds within the Dark Imperium faced particular challenges, as their reliance on complex supply chains and technical expertise made them vulnerable to the economic disruption caused by severed communication links. The tech priests who governed these worlds struggled to maintain production levels while adapting their manufacturing processes to compensate for materials and components that could no longer be imported from other regions. Some Forge worlds attempted to establish independent research programs to develop alternatives to traditional Imperial technology, their efforts producing innovations that bordered on tech heresy but proved necessary for survival. The Imperial Navy assets trapped within Imperium Nihilus discovered that their vessels required extensive modification to operate effectively in the reality-distorted environment created by the Great Rift's influence. Standard Geller field configurations proved inadequate against the intensified warp phenomena that accompanied travel through the region, while conventional navigation equipment failed to function reliably in areas where space itself had become unstable. Fleet commanders were forced to develop new tactical doctrines that emphasized short-range operations and defensive positioning rather than the long-range patrol and interdiction missions that had previously characterized Imperial naval operations. The Ecclesiarchy's response to the Great Rift's formation combined increased missionary activity with the development of new theological frameworks that attempted to explain the catastrophe in terms of Imperial doctrine. Preachers throughout the affected regions proclaimed that the rift represented a test of faith that would separate the truly faithful from those whose devotion proved inadequate, while others interpreted the disaster as punishment for humanity's sins that could only be overcome through increased piety and sacrifice. These competing interpretations created theological disputes that sometimes erupted into open conflict between different imperial factions. The Inquisition's operations within Imperium Nihilus required significant reorganization, as the traditional cell-based structure that relied on astropathic communication proved unworkable in the disrupted psychic environment. Individual inquisitors found themselves forced to operate with greater autonomy than ever before, their decisions carrying consequences that could affect entire sectors without the possibility of consultation with their superiors. This increased responsibility led some inquisitors to adopt increasingly radical methods that pushed the boundaries of acceptable imperial practice, while others became paralyzed by the weight of decisions they were unprepared to make independently. The emergence of Robute Guilliman from his 10,000-year stasis represented the Imperium's most significant hope for addressing the crisis created by the Great Rift, as the returned Primarch possessed both the authority and the capabilities necessary to coordinate a galaxy spanning response to the disaster. The Ultramarines Primarch's revival through a combination of Eldar intervention and arcane Imperial technology provided him with perspectives on the current situation that combined his original strategic genius with knowledge gained from his extended period of near-death experience. His immediate assessment of the Imperium's condition revealed the full extent of the institutional decay and strategic vulnerability that had accumulated during his absence. Guilliman's return to active command coincided with his appointment as Lord Commander of the Imperium, a position that granted him authority over all Imperial military forces and administrative structures. This unprecedented concentration of power in a single individual represented a dramatic departure from the fragmented command structure that had characterized Imperial governance since the Horus Heresy, but the crisis created by the Great Rift made such extraordinary measures necessary for survival. The Primarch's first actions in his new role focused on establishing communication networks that could function despite the psychic interference created by the dimensional tier. The Indomitus Crusade launched by Guilliman represented the largest military operation undertaken by the Imperium since the Great Crusade, its objectives encompassing both the reconquest of worlds lost to chaos and the establishment of supply lines that could maintain Imperial presence throughout the Dark Imperium. The forces assembled for this campaign included not just traditional Imperial military units, but also the new Primaris Space Marines, whose enhanced capabilities had been developed during Guilliman's absence. These genetically improved warriors possessed strength and resilience that exceeded even the legendary standards of their predecessors, their equipment incorporating technological advances that pushed the boundaries of current Imperial manufacturing capabilities. The Primaris Marines deployed during the Indomitus Crusade represented the culmination of 10,000 years of genetic research and technological development overseen by Belisarius Cawl, the Archmagos whose controversial projects had operated in secret since the aftermath of the Horus Heresy. These enhanced warriors carried weapons and wore armor that incorporated innovations derived from both recovered archaeotech and original research that had continued throughout the long millennia of Imperial decline. Their deployment to existing Space Marine chapters created political tensions that reflected deeper questions about the nature of Imperial genetic engineering and the acceptable limits of technological innovation. The strategic objectives of the Indomitus Crusade extended beyond simple military conquest to encompass the reconstruction of Imperial infrastructure throughout the regions affected by the Great Rift. Guilliman's forces carried with them the materials and expertise necessary to re-establish astropathic communication networks, repair damaged astronomic and relay stations, and construct new fortress worlds that could serve as staging areas for future operations. The logistical complexity of these operations required coordination between multiple Imperial organizations whose traditional rivalries and jurisdictional disputes threatened to undermine the entire campaign. The resistance encountered by Indomitus Crusade forces revealed the full extent of the changes that had occurred within Imperium Nihilus during the period following the Great Rift's formation. Chaos forces that had established permanent strongholds on formerly Imperial worlds proved far more organized and effective than traditional enemy forces, their coordination suggesting guidance from intelligent commanders who understood both Imperial tactics and the supernatural capabilities provided by demon allies. The battles fought during the early phases of the Crusade required tactical innovations that combined conventional military doctrine with anti-demon warfare techniques on a scale never before attempted. The plague wars that erupted in the Ultramar sector demonstrated the new challenges facing Imperial forces in the post-Rift galaxy, as Nurgle's forces launched coordinated assaults that combined biological warfare with conventional military tactics and supernatural corruption. The Death Guard Traitor Legion's invasion of Guilliman's home realm tested both the Primarch's strategic abilities and the effectiveness of the new Primaris Marines against enemies who had spent 10 millennia perfecting their corruption techniques. These conflicts revealed that the traditional Imperial advantages in equipment and training had been significantly eroded by the enemy's accumulated experience and supernatural enhancements. The battles fought on Ix and other worlds within the Ultramar sector showcased the reality-altering effects that accompanied major demon incursions in the post-Rift environment. Imperial forces discovered that their enemies could manipulate local environmental conditions to create advantages that ranged from toxic atmospheres that favored Nurgle's servants to temporal distortions that allowed Chaos forces to attack from multiple time periods simultaneously. The adaptation required to combat these supernatural tactics pushed Imperial military doctrine beyond its traditional boundaries and forced commanders to develop new approaches that incorporated psychic warfare as a standard element of battlefield planning. The establishment of new supply routes through regions affected by the Great Rift required the development of navigation techniques that could function despite the disrupted psychic environment created by the dimensional tier. Imperial navigator houses worked with Mechanicus tech priests to develop hybrid systems that combined traditional warp sight with technological augmentation designed to filter out the interference patterns generated by the rift's chaotic energies. These innovations proved only partially successful, as the fundamental instability of the affected regions made reliable navigation impossible through conventional means. The construction of fortress worlds and relay stations throughout the Dark Imperium represented an enormous investment of resources and personnel that strained Imperial logistics to their breaking point. The materials required for these projects had to be transported across regions where warp travel remained unreliable and dangerous, while the specialized personnel needed for construction and operation of these facilities required training that exceeded the capabilities of many Imperial institutions. The completion of even basic infrastructure projects required years of sustained effort and constant protection against enemy interference. The political fragmentation that accompanied the Great Rift's formation represented only the most visible symptom of a deeper crisis that threatened to fundamentally reshape humanity's relationship with the Immaterium. As Imperial forces struggled to maintain control over territories bisected by the massive dimensional tier, the underlying causes of the galaxy's psychic instability continued to intensify according to patterns that suggested the approaching climax of a conflict that had been building for 40 millennia. The Emperor's prolonged confinement to the Golden Throne had created a psychic feedback loop of unprecedented magnitude, his consciousness locked in eternal struggle against the Chaos Gods, while his physical form deteriorated with each passing day. The nature of this cosmic battle extends far beyond the immediate tactical concerns of demon incursions and warp storms, encompassing fundamental questions about humanity's evolutionary destiny and the ultimate fate of consciousness itself within the galaxy. The Emperor's original vision of guiding humanity toward a psychic awakening that would transcend the limitations of physical existence has become corrupted into a nightmarish struggle for the very survival of human souls, while the Chaos Gods work systematically to corrupt every aspect of sentient experience into forms that serve their appetites for emotion and suffering. This conflict operates simultaneously across multiple levels of reality, from the individual battles fought by Imperial psychers against demonic possession to the galaxy-spanning manipulation of probability and causation that characterizes the eternal game played between divine entities. The increasing frequency of psychic manifestations throughout Imperial space indicates that humanity's evolutionary pressure toward greater psychic sensitivity continues despite the obvious dangers such development represents. Each generation produces larger numbers of individuals with latent psychic abilities, their emergence creating additional stress on the systems designed to identify and control potentially dangerous psychers. The Scholastica Psychona's processing facilities operate beyond their designed capacity, while mortality rates during training continue to climb, suggesting that the traditional methods of psyker management may prove inadequate for addressing the scale of psychic awakening that appears to be accelerating throughout human populations. Recent studies conducted by Magos Biologas researchers have identified genetic markers that suggest the psychic mutation rate among baseline humans has increased by approximately 30% since the formation of the Great Rift, with some frontier worlds reporting manifestation rates that exceed traditional Imperial projections by factors of 10 or more. These populations face impossible choices between reporting their psychic citizens to Imperial authorities for collection and attempting to hide them from the black ships that patrol their systems. The communities that choose concealment often develop their own informal training methods that combine folk wisdom with desperate improvisation, their techniques producing psychers whose abilities remain largely uncontrolled, but who avoid the certainty of death or soul binding that awaits those processed through official Imperial channels. The emergence of these hidden psyker populations creates additional opportunities for chaos corruption, as untrained individuals with powerful abilities represent ideal targets for demonic manipulation and possession. Chaos cults throughout imperial space have adapted their recruitment strategies to focus specifically on these underground communities, their agents offering training and protection in exchange for loyalty that gradually transforms desperate families into willing servants of the ruinous powers. The success of these corruption campaigns suggests that the traditional imperial approach of treating all unsanctioned psykers as threats may be creating the very problems it seeks to prevent. Alternative approaches to psyker management have begun to emerge in regions where imperial authority has been weakened by the Great Rift's effects, with some planetary governors experimenting with local training programs that attempt to develop psychic abilities while maintaining loyalty to imperial doctrine. These initiatives operate in legal gray areas that technically violate imperial law but reflect practical necessities created by the breakdown of traditional support systems. The results of these experiments vary dramatically depending on the quality of available instruction and the resources dedicated to psychic education, but early reports suggest that locally trained psykers may actually demonstrate greater resistance to chaos corruption than their Scholastica Psychona counterparts. The theological implications of humanity's accelerating psychic evolution have created significant debates within the ecclesiarchy regarding the proper interpretation of the Emperor's divine plan for the species. Traditional doctrine maintains that psychic abilities represent gifts from the Emperor that must be carefully controlled and channeled towards service to the Imperium, but the increasing prevalence of these abilities among the general population challenges assumptions about their exceptional nature. Some theologians argue that widespread psychic awakening represents the fulfillment of the Emperor's original vision for humanity's transcendence, while others interpret the phenomenon as a sign of approaching apocalypse that requires immediate intervention through prayer and purification rituals. The emergence of new forms of psychic phenomena that do not fit traditional imperial classification systems has forced scholars throughout the Imperium to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of warp interaction and human consciousness. Reports from frontier worlds describe individuals who demonstrate abilities that combine elements traditionally associated with different psychic disciplines, while others manifest powers that appear to operate according to principles that contradict established theoretical frameworks. These anomalous cases suggest that humanity's psychic evolution may be entering a new phase that requires completely different approaches to training and control. The potential for new chaos gods to emerge from the changing psychic landscape represents one of the most terrifying possibilities facing imperial strategists and theologians. The accumulated emotional residue of 40 millennia of warfare, oppression, and despair has created vast reservoirs of negative psychic energy within the warp that could coalesce into additional divine entities if they achieve sufficient concentration and focus. The specific nature of these potential new gods remains difficult to predict, but their emergence would likely reflect the dominant themes of imperial civilization: authoritarian control, technological worship, and the systematic suppression of individual freedom in service to collective survival. The concept of a nascent god of tyranny that feeds on the psychic emanations generated by imperial governance structures has been proposed by several radical inquisitors whose investigations into chaos phenomena have revealed disturbing parallels between imperial and chaos organizational methods. This theoretical entity would draw power from the fear and submission generated by the Imperium's oppressive bureaucracy, its growth fueled by the countless acts of cruelty and injustice committed in the Emperor's name throughout human space. The irony of such a development would represent the ultimate corruption of the Emperor's vision, as humanity's survival mechanisms transform into the very forces that threaten its spiritual destruction. Similarly, the Adeptus Mechanicus's worship of technology and their gradual replacement of human flesh with mechanical components could potentially give birth to a chaos god of technological corruption that represents the dark mirror of the Omnissiah. This entity would embody the dehumanizing aspects of technological advancement, feeding on the psychic energy generated by individuals who sacrifice their humanity in pursuit of mechanical perfection. The tech priests' increasing reliance on artificial intelligence systems and their willingness to experiment with potentially dangerous technologies create ideal conditions for such corruption to take root within their organization. The strengthening of existing chaos gods through the increased psychic activity generated by the Great Rift's formation has already produced observable changes in their capabilities and influence throughout the galaxy. Khorne's domain has expanded to encompass new forms of conflict that extend beyond traditional warfare to include the systematic oppression and violence that characterizes imperial governance, while Tzeentch's influence has grown through the proliferation of conspiracy theories and political manipulation that accompany the breakdown of reliable communication networks. Nurgle's power feeds on the despair and resignation that affect populations cut off from imperial support, while Slaanesh draws strength from the excess and corruption that flourish in regions where traditional moral constraints have collapsed. The interaction between these strengthened chaos gods and humanity's evolving psychic capabilities creates feedback loops that accelerate both processes simultaneously. More powerful chaos entities can corrupt larger numbers of psykers more effectively, while the increased psychic activity generated by these corrupted individuals provides additional energy for further chaos expansion. This spiral of mutual reinforcement suggests that the current crisis may represent a tipping point beyond which imperial civilization cannot recover through conventional means. Theoretical solutions to the warp's corruption have been proposed by various imperial scholars and researchers, though most of these approaches require resources and capabilities that exceed current imperial capacity. The completion of the Emperor's original Webway project remains the most frequently cited solution, as it would eliminate humanity's dependence on warp travel while providing safe passage between the stars. However, the technical challenges involved in repairing the damage caused by Magnus's breach of the project's defenses may prove insurmountable given the current state of Imperial technology and the Emperor's continued confinement to the Golden Throne. Alternative webway construction projects have been proposed that would create smaller, more limited tunnel networks designed to connect specific strategic locations rather than attempting to span the entire galaxy. These reduced-scope initiatives would require cooperation between Imperial factions that have traditionally maintained strict independence, including potential collaboration with surviving Eldar factions whose webway expertise could prove invaluable. The political obstacles to such cooperation may prove more difficult to overcome than the technical challenges, as centuries of mutual hostility and mistrust would need to be set aside in favor of pragmatic alliance building. The possibility of the Emperor's ascension to true godhood represents another potential solution that has gained support among certain theological factions within the ecclesiarchy. This approach would involve channeling the faith and devotion of humanity's quadrillions of citizens into a focused psychic effort designed to transform the Emperor from his current state as a dying psyker into a fully realized chaos god equivalent dedicated to humanity's protection. The theoretical advantages of such transformation include the elimination of the Emperor's physical vulnerabilities and the creation of a divine entity capable of matching the ruinous powers in direct psychic combat. However, the risks associated with the Emperor's potential apotheosis include the possibility that such transformation would fundamentally alter his nature in ways that could prove as dangerous as the threats he currently opposes. The process of becoming a chaos god typically involves the abandonment of mortal concerns and limitations, potentially creating an entity whose priorities and methods might not align with humanity's survival needs. The historical precedent of the Eldar Pantheon's destruction during their civilization's fall serves as a warning about the dangers inherent in relying too heavily on divine protection. Humanity's continued psychic evolution represents both the greatest hope and the most significant threat facing the species in the current era. The theoretical endpoint of this evolutionary process could produce a human subspecies with psychic abilities powerful enough to resist chaos corruption while maintaining the technological and organizational capabilities necessary for galactic civilization. These evolved humans would possess natural defenses against demonic influence, while retaining the creativity and adaptability that have allowed humanity to survive and prosper despite facing countless existential threats. The path towards such evolution would require fundamental changes in imperial policy regarding psyker training and development, shifting from the current approach of suppression and control toward active cultivation of psychic abilities within carefully controlled parameters. This transformation would necessitate the development of new educational systems, training methodologies, and social structures designed to support populations with widespread psychic capabilities. The risks involved in such experimentation include the possibility of accelerating chaos corruption rates or creating psychic phenomena that exceed imperial ability to contain or control. The ultimate fate of the galaxy, should the Immaterium fully consume real space, represents a scenario that imperial strategists refuse to discuss publicly, but which underlies many of their long-term planning assumptions. The complete breakdown of the barriers between dimensions would transform the material universe into an extension of the warp itself, creating an environment where reality operates according to the whims of the chaos gods rather than natural law. In such a scenario, human civilization would face extinction not through military conquest, but through the fundamental alteration of the conditions necessary for rational thought and organized society. The potential for redemption through collective will represent humanity's most powerful weapon against such a fate, as the species' greatest strength has always been its ability to unite in the face of existential threats. The faith and determination that have sustained imperial civilization through 10 millennia of warfare and suffering could theoretically be channeled into a galaxy-spanning effort to restore stability to the warp through sheer force of collective belief. This approach would require unprecedented cooperation between all imperial factions and possibly alliance with Xeno species, whose survival also depends on maintaining the barriers between dimensions. The implementation of such a collective effort would face enormous practical obstacles, including the communication difficulties created by the Great Rift and the traditional rivalries that prevent effective cooperation between different imperial organizations. The success of any redemption attempt would depend on overcoming these institutional barriers while maintaining the unity of purpose necessary for psychic effects on a galactic scale. The historical precedent for such cooperation remains limited, though the current crisis may provide sufficient motivation to overcome traditional obstacles. The eternal nature of the conflict between order and chaos ensures that any victory achieved by either side will prove temporary, as the fundamental forces that drive this struggle are built into the nature of consciousness itself. The chaos gods represent aspects of sentient experience that cannot be eliminated without destroying the capacity for thought and emotion that defines intelligent life, while the forces of order embody the organizational principles necessary for civilization and progress. This eternal tension creates a dynamic equilibrium that has shaped galactic history since the first sentient beings developed the capacity for abstract thought. The current crisis represents not the final battle in this eternal war, but rather another phase in a conflict that will continue as long as conscious beings exist within the galaxy. The specific forms that this struggle takes will evolve as new species develop psychic capabilities and as existing civilizations adapt to changing conditions, but the underlying dynamic between creativity and destruction, hope and despair, order and chaos will persist regardless of which particular factions achieve temporary dominance. Humanity's role in this eternal struggle remains that of a species caught between transcendence and extinction, possessing the potential for both outcomes depending on the choices made by current and future generations. The Emperor's vision of humanity's psychic evolution continues to offer hope for a future where the species can master its relationship with the warp while avoiding the corruption that has destroyed so many previous civilizations. However, the achievement of such mastery will require wisdom, courage, and unity on a scale that has rarely been demonstrated in human history. The Immaterium itself will continue to exist as both humanity's greatest tool and its most dangerous enemy, its chaotic energies offering unlimited potential for those capable of harnessing them safely while threatening destruction for those who approach them without proper preparation. The Sea of Souls remains what it has always been, a reflection of the collective consciousness of all sentient life, shaped by the hopes and fears, dreams and nightmares of countless billions of thinking beings across the galaxy. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the battle for humanity's soul continues across dimensions that exist beyond the reach of conventional weapons. The outcome of this struggle will determine not just the survival of human civilization, but the very nature of consciousness itself within a galaxy where the boundaries between thought and reality have become increasingly meaningless. The Emperor's great work remains unfinished, his vision of humanity's transcendence still possible, but requiring sacrifices and choices that will test the species' commitment to its own survival and evolution. The eternal struggle continues, as it always has and always will, in the depths of the Immaterium, where gods are born from mortal dreams and nightmares become reality through the power of collective belief. Humanity's fate hangs in the balance, suspended between salvation and damnation, in a war that encompasses not just the material universe, but the very essence of what it means to be conscious in a cosmos where thought itself has become a weapon of ultimate destruction and unlimited creation.